Tita
Yung
Cynthia,
valuation ng real estate, ginagalaw nila.
Tita Cynthia, si Tito Frank, malaki rin ang tulong, ha?
Kaya nga, sabi ko nga, thank you eh.
Kasi,
Alam ko naman na-understand niya eh. Kilala niya yung mga broker namin, housewives lang. Paano ba naman gagawa na report yun? Diyos ko naman.
kaya nga, it's less on the bureaucratic process rin.
Oo. Ayaw sila sa LRA. Sana i-computerize nila LRA para kung ayaw gawin ng LRA, yung computer ang gagawa, di ba?
Matagal nang kinomputerize, lalong bumagal. Parang BIR.
So, hindi fully computerized.
Alam mo ba na kami ang pending namin sa LRA, kadami-dami din. Yes.
Nakamute si SP.
Oo. Ay, nako.
Inay.
Cayetano. Tinatawag na tayo.
Nakamute si SP.
De La Rosa.
Present.
Present ako Present.
Gatchalian. Go.
Present po ako.
Gordon.
Present po.
Gordon.
Wala.
Gordon. Ontiveros.
Present.
Lacson. Lapid.
Kanina.
Marcos. Pacquiao. Pangilinan.
Present.
Pimentel III.
Ako na si tawag na yan.
O.
Present.
Recto.
Wala. Ayun.
Revilla Jr.
Present.
Tolentino. Villanueva. Villar.
Present.
Zubiri.
Present.
Senate President Soto III is present.
Nasaan ka kahapon, Bong?
Tanungin nyo, tita. Huwag mo tanungin. Angara present also.
Mr. President, I move that we defer the approval of the journal of the 35th session Monday, January 18, 2021 at a later hour, Mr. President.
The chair declares a 1-minute suspension. Please forgive the chair. We just received a very important call. The motion is to
Proceed with
approve
the, I'm sorry, to defer the approval of the journal, Mr. President.
defer. All right, all right. Any objection? Hearing none, so deferred.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we proceed
Majority
with the
Leader.
reference. Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, yesterday, I understand that you wanted additional members of the bicameral conference committee on behalf of the Senate for
Mr.
House Bill
President.
1357 and House Bill
Yes.
4157, and therefore,
Mr. President,
yesterday,
before we act on the motion, Mr. President, we'd like to beg the indulgence of the chair. Instead of Senator Angara, maybe we elect Senator Gatchalian to join me, Mr. President.
All right. So yesterday, with Senator Villanueva presiding, you designated, or the Senate designated, Senators Pia Cayetano with Senator Recto. No.
No, Mr. President. Yesterday,
Mr. President, it was
we-
Senator Poe, Senator Recto, and Senator Drilon.
that was for the AMLAC amendments, Mr. President. That was for the AMLAC amendments.
For the AMLA
Yes,
amendment.
it's for the AMLA
So that
amendments,
was what
Mr. President.
done yesterday. All right.
Yes.
Good. Therefore,
Tapos
Please,
na yung AMLAC. We already concluded.
And we have good
AMLAC,
news.
Mr. President.
Yes, may we recognize Senator Grace Poe. I think we have good news on the AMLAC BICAM.
Oh,
Senator Grace Poe is recognized.
I'd like to report to the body, particularly to our Senate President, that with the expert guidance of Senator Drilon and Senator Recto, we were able to reconcile the conflict provisions in the AMLAC bill. So mukhang okay na they adopted a lot of the versions of the Senate. We had a few issues that we had to resolve, and we made a very good and just compromise, Mr. President. So we will just have to ratify it in the House. So that's the report.
All right, very good. Thank you. We place that on record. And I stand corrected. What I wanted to do was to designate 2 additional members of the bicameral conference committee on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 1357 and House Bill 4157. And that is an
Yes.
additional member of Senator Subiri and Gatchalian. So for the record,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader,
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to proceed with the reference of business.
the Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business, message of the President of the Philippines, letter of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte dated 15 December 2020, stating that pursuant to the provisions of Article 6, Section 26, Paragraph 2 of the 1987 Constitution, I hereby certify to the necessity of the immediate enactment of Senate Number 1945 entitled An Act to Further Strengthen the Anti-Money Laundering Law, amending for the purpose Sections 3, 7, 10, 12, and 20 of Republic Act Number 9160, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001 as amended, and for other purposes, in order to address strategic deficiencies in our anti-money laundering and countering terrorism financing legal framework and avoid adverse findings against the country. This certification, however, is subject to the proposed reduction of the threshold of tax crimes to 20 million, retention of the prevailing reporting threshold for real estate transactions, and grant of the requested additional investigative powers to the Anti-Money Laundering Council as reflected in House Bill number 7904, which was recently passed by the House of Representatives. I believe that these provisions are absolutely necessary to achieve the objectives of this bill.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 15 December 2020, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 8065, entitled An Act Imposing Taxes on Off-Site Betting Activities on Locally Licensed Cockfights and Derbies, amending Section 125 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
House number 7886, an act imposing stiffer penalties for the offenses of stealing or vandalizing of government road and traffic signs, warning devices, accessories, and other facilities.
To the Committee on Justice and Public Works.
House number 7951, an act providing for protection of the remittances of overseas Filipino workers.
The Committee on Banks and the Committee on Labor.
And House number 8005, entitled An Act institutionalizing the convergence strategy for sustainable rural development and providing the implementing mechanisms therefor.
To the Committees on Social Justice and Finance.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 1956, an act promoting the welfare of the barangay officials by providing regularization, salary standardization, and special risk allowance in times of state of emergency or calamities and during similar situations as may be declared by the national government and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Local Government, Civil Service, and Finance.
Senate Number 1957, an act establishing the Special Economic Zone and Freeport in the province of Sarangani, creating for this purpose the Sarangani Special Economic Zone and Freeport Authority and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means, and Finance. There is additional reference to business. Please proceed.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 16 December 2020, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Number 8040, an act integrating the Consolacion Community College in the Municipality of Consolacion, Province of Cebu, into the Cebu Technological University, CTU, to be known as the CTU Consolacion Campus and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Higher Education and Finance.
House Number 8041, an act establishing an Indigenous Peoples Resource and Training Center in the Nueva Vizcaya State University, defining its functions and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Cultural Communities, Higher Education, and Finance.
House Number 8077, an act reclassifying as agricultural land a parcel of land of the public domain situated in Lourdes, Alubihid, Province of Misamis Oriental, to be utilized as the site of the Science and Technology Park of the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines.
To the Committee on Environment.
House Number 5680, an act converting the Land Transportation Office Region 6 of Bacolod City into a regular licensing center to be known as the Negros Occidental Licensing Center, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
To the Committee on Public Services and Finance.
House Number 8081, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Biliran, province of Biliran, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Finance.
And House Number 8082, an act establishing a freshwater fish hatchery in the municipality of Talacogon, province of Agusan del Sur, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Finance.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 1958, an act creating the Cagayan River Basin Development Authority, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, providing funds therefore, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Government Corporations, Environment, and Finance.
Senate Number 1959, an act creating the Environmental Protection and Enforcement Bureau, EPEB, under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, DNR, providing for its powers and functions and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Environment, Civil Service, and Finance.
Senate Number 1960, an act converting the Balicuatro College of Arts and Trades in the municipality of Allen, province of Northern Samar, into the Northern Samar Polytechnic Institute and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Higher Education and Finance.
Senate Number 1961, an act to reclassify the Mangabul Reservation in the municipality of Bayambang, province of Pangasinan, into alienable and disposable of the public domain for the purpose of redistributing the same to the bona fide and long-term farmers, occupants thereof, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Environment and Agriculture.
Senate Number 1962, an act establishing a provincial office of the Commission on Higher Education in the province of Northern Samar and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Higher Education and Finance.
Senate Number 1963, an act establishing campuses of the University of Eastern Philippines, UEP, in the municipalities of Allen, Victoria, and Lavazares, province of Northern Samar, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Higher Education and Finance.
Senate Number 1964, an act declaring climate change emergency and enhancing resiliency and adaptability to the effects of climate change, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Environment.
Senate Number 1965, an act mandating the suspension of the scheduled increase in Social Security contribution rate, amending for the purpose Section 4 of Republic Act Number 11199, otherwise known as the Social Security Act of 2018, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Labor.
Senate Number 1966, an act to suspend the increase in premium rate contributions to the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation PhilHealth for the year 2021 and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Health.
Senate Number 1967, an act renewing the franchise granted to ABS-CBN Corporation under Republic Act Number 7966, otherwise known as an act granting ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation a franchise to construct, install, operate, and maintain television and radio broadcasting stations in the Philippines, and for other purposes for 25 years from the effectivity of this act, introduced by Senator Soto, Recto, Zubiri, Drilon, Lacson, Angara, Binay, Gatchalian, Gordon, Lapid, Pacquiao, Villanueva, Ontiveros, Pangilinan, Pimentel III, De Lima, and Binay.
To the Committee on Rules.
Senate Number 1968, an act amending the suspension of scheduled increase in PhilHealth premium contributions, amending for the purpose Section 10 of Republic Act Number 11223, otherwise known as the Universal Healthcare Act, and for other purposes, introduced by Senators Poe, Zubiri, and Villanueva.
To the Committees on Health and Finance.
Senate Number 1969, an act recognizing CGF Life Academy Foundation Incorporated as an educational institution of international character, granting certain prerogatives to hasten its growth as such and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Rules.
Senate Number 1970, an act deferring the increase in contribution of the Social Security System, amending Section 4A9 of Republic Act Number 11199, also known as the Social Security Act of 2018, introduced by Senator Gordon.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Labor.
Senate Number 1971, an act authorizing the deferment of the schedule of premium contributions under Section 10 of Republic Act Number 11223, otherwise known as the Universal Healthcare Act, in times of national emergency or state of calamity, introduced by Senator Gordon.
To the Committees on Health and Finance.
Senate Number 1973, an act expanding the grant of 20% discount and exemption from the value-added tax VAT to senior citizens to include medicines, supplements, vitamins, herbal products, and formulated milk medically duly prescribed or recommended by physicians, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committees on Social Justice and Ways and Means.
Senate Number 1974, an act instituting the Food and Drug Administration as an independent agency, amending certain sections of Republic Act Number 3720 as amended, and Republic Act Number 9711, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Health.
Senate Number 1975, an act amending Republic Act Number 11223, otherwise known as an act instituting universal health care for all Filipinos, prescribing reforms in the healthcare system and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Health and Finance.
Resolutions. PS Resolution Number 599, a resolution urging the proper Senate committees to conduct an investigation in aid of legislation on the spate of unlawful killings with the end in view of attaining justice for the slain victims and creating policies that will help restore the law and order into the country, introduced by Senators Ontiveros, Recto, Drilon, Pangilinan, Binay, De Lima, and Gordon.
To the Committee on Public Order and Justice.
PS Resolution Number 600, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees of the Senate to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the series of unlawful killings of citizens, including doctors, lawyers, journalists, and members of other professions, with the end in view of identifying the gaps in law enforcement, attaining justice for all victims, and breaking the culture of impunity, especially among law enforcement agencies, introduced by Senators Villanueva, Angara, Binay, Poe, Zubiri, and Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Public Order.
PS Resolution Number 601, resolution urging the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the proliferation of coal power plants in the country, despite the Philippines being a signatory to the Paris Agreement and the President's call for drastic cuts in carbon emissions, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Energy, Environment.
PS Resolution Number 602, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the pandemic of killing that continues to infect the legal profession at an alarmingly accelerating rate, with the end in view of safeguarding the guardians of the law and vanguards of justice in order to likewise eradicate the serious threat to democracy and the rule of law that these killings have posed, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committees on Public Order and Justice.
PS Resolution Number 603, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the reported early inoculation of members of the cabinet, the Presidential Security Group, and senior officials in the Armed Forces of the Philippines using unregistered and smuggled COVID-19 vaccines, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committee on Health.
PS Resolution Number 604, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the continuing reports of child online sexual exploitation, despite numerous laws safeguarding and affecting rights of the children, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Women.
PS Resolution number 605, resolution urging the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the gruesome killing of Sonia Gregorio and her son Frank Anthony Gregorio in Tarlac by an officer of the Philippine National Police with the end in view of reviewing policies and organizational standards related to training and education, performance evaluation and promotion, and regular assessment of PNP personnel towards ensuring a more effective, professional, credible, and service-oriented police force, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Public Order.
PS Resolution number 606, resolution expressing the sense of the Senate of the Philippines to join the Catholic Church and the faithful in the celebration of 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Rules.
Committee report number 161, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Foreign Relations and Public Services on Senate number 1972 with Senators Tolentino, Pimentel III, and Poe as authors thereof, entitled An Act Mandating the Duty to Render Assistance at Sea in accordance with relevant international conventions to which the Philippines is a state party and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate number 209, sponsor Senator Pimentel III.
To the calendar for ordinary business. We have a second additional reference of business. Please proceed.
Resolutions, PS Resolution number 607, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported increase in suspicious transactions linked to child pornography in the country, introduced by Senator Binay.
To the Committees on Women and Science and Technology.
PS Resolution number 608, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent shooting incident at Paniki, Tarlac by a police officer causing fear, shock, and anger among the populace and besmirching the image of the Philippine National Police as protector of the people, and with the end in view of strengthening our laws that aim to ensure and promote the psychiatric and psychological fitness of officers and members of the PNP, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Public Order.
PS Resolution number 609, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the growing trend of sugar dating in the Philippines during the COVID-19 pandemic and the surge in popularity of potentially exploitative websites aimed at women seeking alternative sources of income, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committees on Women and Science and Technology.
PS Resolution number 610, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Basic Education, Arts, and Culture to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of the implementation of the mother tongue-based multilingual education as mandated under Republic Act number 10533 or the K-12 law for the purpose of determining the effectivity of its integration into the Philippine basic education system as medium of instruction, specifically from kindergarten to grade 3, and its impact on the quality of the basic education of the learners, introduced by Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Basic Education.
PS Resolution number 611, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alarming increases in the prices of basic commodities such as pork, fish, and vegetables, with the end in view of implementing urgent measures that will control and manage the cost of these basic commodities that pose a threat to the right to food of Filipinos and affect the fragile condition of many Filipino households, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Trade.
PS Resolution 612, resolution urging the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the current state of COVID-19 diagnostic testing in the country, with the end in view of assessing, recalibrating, and enhancing our testing capabilities in light of the new strains and variants of the coronavirus that may affect the quality and reliability of COVID-19 testing results, introduced by Senator De Lima.
The Committee on Health. Majority Leader.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I recognize Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. President?
Senator Richard Gordon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just wanted to reconfirm that my bill on the matter of freezing the rise of premiums, particularly with the SSS and government corporations, which are quite important. I would imagine that would be referred to my committee, the Government Corporations Committee, because it really just suspends the and allows the particular agencies, SSS and GSIS, able to act fast during times of emergencies. I believe it was, if I heard correctly, it was being processed through finance and health, Mr. President. If there is something there, then I will yield to the wisdom of the chair.
SSS po sa government.
Mr. President, may I ask for 1 minute? May I ask for 1 minute suspension and we can check with the Secretariat on the status of these bills.
We have it already. It's
Okay, Mr. President.
Senate Bill 1971. It's referred to the Committee on Health and Finance. This is the recommendation of the committee, the Bills and Index Office. Unless otherwise decided by the Senate, it stands as the correct referral.
Well, particularly, Mr. President, the sponsor of that measure in the 17th Congress was our distinguished gentleman from Zambales, Senator Gordon. So he was the sponsor in his committee for the bill amending the SSS charter, I believe, and that is where it provides the increases of the monthly contributions. So it would be all right, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President, to return it back to him.
No. That bill is referred to the Committee on Government Corporations, that one that you're mentioning. But this 1971 is the deferment of premium contributions
For
on
PhilHealth.
in the Universal
Okay, Mr.
Healthcare
President.
Act. That is
Yes.
why it's referred to the Committee on Health and Finance.
My apologies,
The
I
other
thought
one
we
is
were
indeed
discussing.
referred
Yeah,
to
we
the
were discussing
government
SSS.
corporations.
Yes, my apologies,
Yeah,
Mr. President.
SSS is referred to the Committee on Government Corporations.
Okay, so okay, Mr. President.
I just want to explain, Mr. President, that this is just a deferment during times of emergencies of a basic bill that I authored, Mr. President. And to give it to two committees might delay it unduly. Now, Mr. President, if that is the wisdom of the Bills and Index Division, supplanting the author of the SSS, Mr. President, and
No, the SSS bill is referred to the Committee on Government Corporations.
all right, okay, Mr. President, that's the case.
It is referred there to your committee.
So PhilHealth
All right.
also is going to be referred to
The PhilHealth, Mr. President,
No.
because the
No,
bill
PhilHealth
on the
is
Phil, yes, refer to the. May I explain, Mr. President?
PhilHealth is referred to Committee on Health
Yes,
and Finance.
the bill on PhilHealth was actually an amendment on the Universal Health Care Act,
yes.
which was actually
Correct.
the Committee on Health, and Senator J.V.
Correct.
Ejercito was the one who defended that, and therefore it is being brought back to them for amendment, Mr. President.
Correct.
All right, understood.
That's the correct.
Precisely. That's the way it stands right now.
Understood, Mr. President. Thank you
All
very
right.
much. I also would like to ask
All right. Thank you.
the resolution yesterday after my speech on the matter of the peril that our people are facing with the recalcitrant PNP as well as criminals, Mr. President, that have gone unabated, that have continued to be and continue to be unabated, Mr. President. I remember that was referred to the Committee on Justice. Does that stand, Mr.
Yes.
President? All right.
Yes,
Mr.
correct.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just
Thank
want
you.
to clarify it.
All
Thank you,
right.
Mr. President.
Yeah, you're welcome. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have very light schedule today. We have two privileged speeches and, of course, a sponsorship for one bill. May I start with the agenda by asking, with the permission of the body, to avail of the privilege hour, Mr. President?
Of course, the Majority Leader is recognized for the privilege hour.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last Saturday afternoon, the peaceful and quiet life in Sitio Nahigit, Barangay Bulunay, in Impasugong, Bukidnon, was shattered when a Philippine Air Force UE helicopter crashed there, killing all 7 passengers and crew. 5 of them were members of the Philippine military, and 2 were members of the CAFGU, or Citizens Armed Force Geographical Unit. The chopper, Mr. President, was on a resupply mission to forward operation base of the 8th Infantry Brigade in the mountains near Impasugong town. It was reported that the crew in the and the other chopper trailing them saw smoke coming from the engine and radioed Lieutenant Colonel Arnie Arroyo, who then decided to turn his chopper to avoid crash landing on the houses underneath. It was then that the chopper nosedived and crashed in the field. And Lieutenant Colonel Arroyo and his crew's deed was truly heroic. I'd like to put on record on the onset, Mr. President, those who had perished in this crash. Their names are, for the record, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Arnie Arroyo, the pilot in command, Second Lieutenant Mark Anthony Kaabay, their co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Mervin Bersabi, Airman First Class Stephen Agarado, Sergeant Julius Salvador, and CAFGU Active Auxiliary Jerry Ayukdo and Jamel Sugalang. Three of them, Mr. President, were residents of my beloved province of Bukidnon. Mr. President, we condole and offer our deepest sympathies to the family of our fallen soldiers and CAFGU members. The Senate honors them for their service to the nation. May this gesture to honor our gallant soldiers give comfort to their families in this time of great loss. However, Mr. President, the accident reminded me of what the media used to call our military aircraft in the 80s and 90s. They used to call them flying coffins, even to a certain extent calling them widow makers. What a sad label, but it's actually true. In the past 6 months, there were 3 other accidents involving the AFP's military aircrafts, which resulted in 9 deaths and injuries of our military personnel. November 2020, Mr. President, another UE helicopter crashed in Llano del Sur, which resulted in 1 death and injuries on their passengers. September 2020, another aircraft, an Air Force Sikorsky air ambulance, crashed in Basilan, which resulted in 4 deaths. And July 2020, another UE helicopter crashed after takeoff in Kawayan, Isabela, leaving 4 personnel dead. Mr. President, the list goes on, and it is a long list of ill-fated military aircraft crashes. The Air Force, Mr. President, claimed that the UE helicopter that crashed in Bukidnon was well maintained. Although, I'd like to put on record, many accidents are considered pilot error, similar to the crash of the brand new PNP helicopter with no less than the PNP chief, Archie Gamboa, on board at that time. But we also like to commend the military leadership for immediately grounding all UE helicopters of the AFP. While I do not doubt that the chopper was well maintained, the use of UE helicopters by our military should be thoroughly reviewed. Mr. President, these UE helicopters are older than me. Some of them were built 1966, 67. They're 55 years old, 50 to 55 years old. In hardware, military hardware, Mr. President, and aircraft machinery, the wear and tear of their airframe due to long hours of use is a big factor, Mr. President, in why some of these aircraft actually crash. So, Mr. President, despite of its colorful history, as the UE helicopter has served in many armies and many air forces around the world, these UE helicopters are in the range, or rather, our UE helicopters are in the range of 40 to 50-year-old air assets. What I'm driving at, Mr. President, is how we need to modernize our military hardware and equipment, including our aircraft. What happened in Bukidnon recently and all the other military aircraft crashes, which resulted in the deaths of our military and civilian personnel, I believe were senseless deaths, Mr. President. Unavoidable accidents if only we were serious in modernizing our military. Our military hardware and aircraft, which are supposed to be our soldiers' protection and advantage in the battlefield, become the reason for military deaths. Simply because, if you ask my opinion, these machines are already very old, quite run down, and even if they're well maintained, as I mentioned earlier, the airframe of these machines have been put to such strain because of its age. In fairness to the military, Mr. President, because I don't want them to think that we are not giving them credit for their modernization. In fairness to the military, this last decade has seen a modernization of some of its hardware, but mostly particularly in the branch of the Navy. We've seen a lot of brand new ships from the Navy, ships made in Korea and in other countries to modernize our Navy fleet. Maybe now, Mr. President, with our chairman of the Committee on Finance listening, maybe now it's time that we also modernize our Air Force as well. Mr. President, we, the Senate, are prepared to listen to our military for what they need. What comfortable level of budget they need for 2022 and in the succeeding years to sustain their efforts in modernizing our military. Modernizing our military is giving our soldiers, who are among the best and the bravest in the world, a fighting chance in the battlefield, a fighting chance to deter or repel external threats in the future. It is the least we can do for our men and women in uniform who have sworn to protect the state and lay down their lives for it if necessary, and has proven in their many heroic feats. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mabuhay po ang ating mga sundalo. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Thank you, Mr. President.
Right.
Mr.
Thank you,
President,
Senator
I
Subiri.
move-
Senator De La Rosa wishes to have the floor. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to commend Senator Miguel Suveri for raising this timely issue on the unfortunate death of our Air Force personnel. This recent incident only highlights the need to constantly fund our armed forces in order to ensure the fruition of the AFP modernization program. It will not only boost our country's defense against threats on its sovereignty, but also ensure that our AFP can effectively and fully perform its constitutional mandate of preserving the patrimony of our country. Moreover, a well-funded AFP modernization program will also ensure the safety of our soldiers whose lives are put at stake in order to serve our countrymen. Mr. President, the issue on funding was already raised during the budget hearing of the Department of National Defense last year, highlighted by our colleagues here in the Senate. It bears reiterating that the constant maintenance of our aircrafts as well as the procurement of new and modern equipment is essential to guarantee that the sacrifices and lives of our soldiers will not merely be put to waste because of engine trouble only. Kasama ni Pangulong Duterte at ng buong Senado, taos puso akong nakikiramay sa mga naulila nila Lieutenant Colonel Arne Arroyo, Second Lieutenant Mark Anthony Kaabay, Staff Sergeant Mervin Bersabe, Airman First Class Stephen Agarado, Sergeant Julius Salvador, AFGO Active Auxiliary Jerry Ayokdo, and Jamel Sugalang. Maraming salamat sa inyong serbisyo. Hindi namin makakalimutan ang inyong naging sakripisyo. That is all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
The
President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President.
Yes, I would like to thank my kababayan from Mindanao and my silingan, my neighbor, Senator Bato de la Rosa, for his support on this particular issue. Being a soldier himself, he knows how very difficult it is if there's equipment failure, especially when they're on the field. And so we thank him, and in the proper time during the budget deliberations, we will badger my dear friend, Senator Sonny Angara, the chairperson, to take a hard look at the Air Force modernization programs, and eventually let's already ground these 50-year-old helicopters. Maybe we can buy them already fairly newer helicopters, and those that were remnants of the Vietnam era should be already placed in museums rather than on the air, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Gordon would like to be recognized as well.
Senator Richard Gordon is recognized. Senator Gordon, you might be on mute. We cannot hear you.
Mr. President, I would like to congratulate
There you go.
my confrere, Senator Subiri, for standing up on this very vital issue. He beat me to it this time, Mr. President. This has been something that I have been raising in all my days in the Senate, Mr. President, principally because It's not because I'm trying to do a Me Tooism or trying to do better than mix. I think all of us, Mr. President, are really required and under our duty to ensure that our fighting men get the best equipment and to make sure that they are maintained properly. But at the same time, we cannot just react just to a crash, Mr. President. Some air forces still have the UE. B-52s are older than some of us here, including myself, perhaps. They're still being used. And they're being used because they're simply modernized. Adjustments are made in avionics and other things, Mr. President. But the point here is we really cannot just rely on business as usual in the military. The first thing we have to understand, Mr. President, and I'm trying to keep myself together here, is that we must know what our military is for. Whether, we have to know what our national security is, and we want to know how we can best protect our national security against external threats. And it would appear that we now have external threats, and the Navy has seen it fit to acquire frigates, some of whom are docked in Subic, Mr. President. And I'm elated, but when you go out, for example, in exercises in the Pacific with other countries like Canada, the United States, Vietnam, and even China participates in those major exercises, we look puny, and I hate to say that it shows our stance on how we can protect our shores and our military. We're going to be celebrating the 500th anniversary, not just of the Christianization, but a celebration of freedom in Lapu-Lapu, Mr. President. By April 29, if I'm not mistaken, on the Battle of Lapu-Lapu, it shows the inert desire of the Filipino to be free and to be ready to serve at that time what his perception of the country was in terms of giving up their lives. We have that in our military. There is no shortage on that. But the government must be held accountable for the fact that we must spend more money in terms of our military assets, Mr. President. I am happy to know that we have bought, I believe, recently 5 Black Hawk helicopters. These are going to replace the UE ultimately because they can carry a squad of soldiers, if I'm not mistaken, and even have the firepower to provide fire support or ground support, Mr. President. But of course, the maintenance has also got to go side by side. The training of our military assets has got to go side by side. And since we lost our F-5, which was a credible fighter, Mr. President, at that time, we have been happy to receive the jets coming from Korea, which are good by themselves, but they're essentially trainers, Mr. President, that have been converted into fighters. I'm reminded during the time of President Marcos that they bought Marconis, and these Marconis were supposed to be laying the predicate for high-performance aircraft, but they remained that way, trainers, and they were used from time to time, even in combat activities, Mr. President. So it is time, Mr. President, to really decide as a nation whether we are going to be respected. Our military is the extension of our diplomacy, Mr. President. If we do not have a credible military, we will be pushed around in the South China Sea. And now that you're having a change in the United States, while I'm confident that Americans don't change their military policy when it comes to having a new president, they will also determine that on the basis of national interest. And they have an interest in the Asia Pacific, and we should stand clear in making sure that we are realize how we can protect ourselves and not just rely on America's military, Mr. President. So there's a bigger issue here. It's not just the accident, and again, I commiserate with the families of the pilots and crew of this UE crash, the latest UE crash. But upon the other hand, I commiserate even more for the fact that we allowed them such niggard assets, Mr. President. Meager assets, if you will. Nakakahiya naman po na hindi ho pinag-uusapan ang shame dito. Nakakahiya ho sa mga sundalo natin na pumapasok at sa kanilang ambisyon makapagsilbi sa bayan, ay hindi natin mabigyan ng tamang gamit. At nakakaya rin po sa taong bayan na hanggang ngayon, nung araw meron tayong F-86 jets na talagang high-performance jets noong 1952. Alam po ba ninyo, nagpunta pa sa Congo yung F-86 natin na yan sa galing ng mga piloto natin. At nung araw meron pa tayong mga Blue Diamonds, ewan ko kung it exists parang hanggang ngayon. Pero forma lang yung Blue Diamond. Ang importante yung gamit nila, Mr. President. Tingnan nyo ating C-130. I can go on and on. I think hindi ko na maintindihan. Nung araw ko pa sinasabi, dadalawa lang yung C-130 natin. Yung isa, nasa maintenance palagi. Ang sabi nila ngayon, meron ng 5 na C-130 natin. At yan hanggang ngayon, 5 or 4 na ginagamit yan. Araw-araw yan ang workhorse. Pagkuha ng gamit, halimbawa sa binibili natin sa China, yung ating mga sundalo, hinahatid yung kanilang supplies sa Sulu, sa Mindanao. Hinahatid ang kanilang mga pamilya, inuuwi sila. Pag nasasaktan sila o namamatay, dadalhin doon sa C-130, ibababa dito sa Nichols, Mr. President, o sa Villamor. So, Mr. President, ang dami nating kakulangan. Now, the principle of other countries, including Korea, including Japan before World War II, especially in World War I, akalaan nyo, from the Meiji Restoration sometime in 1883, by 1905, kung talagang desidido ang isang bansa, na kung tatawagin ninyo backward, na tatawagin nyo na talagang nag-OFW pa rito, mga overseas workers dito sa Baguio na gumawa ng tinatawag natin Cannon Road, sila habang ginagawa nila yon, ginawa nila yung kanilang Navy. At yung kanilang Navy, my dear colleagues, sunk the entire Russian fleet in the Battle of Tsushima in 1905. Pinalubog nila. And since that time, they became respected. They were even part of the treaty, the naval treaty in Washington, na nadihado pa sila ng mga Amerikano dahil takot na takot sila, ang Amerikano, na lumalakas ang Hapon. Binabaan ang kanilang tonnage at ganoon rin ang Britain. So to make a long story short, lahat ng bansa, including Korea na tinamaan ng Korean War, hindi sila umasa sa Amerikano. May mga Amerikano doon, pero patuloy ang kanilang research and development. Kung ano mga barkong gagamitin nila, naintindihan nila ang threat, maaari manggaling sa North Korea, maaari manggaling sa China, o maaari manggaling sa Soviet Union, or even Japan. So sila naghahanda, basta kami maghahanda, para sa ganon, meron tayong magagamit ipagtanggol ang inang bayan. Pero dito sa atin, nakakalimutan natin yan. And I will end by saying, lahat yan, Japan, even China, even the United States before, when they had their fledgling boat, and they had, their big quotes from John Paul Jones and Captain Lawrence, mga don't give up the ship, or I have not yet begun to fight. Kahit na napaka-meager nung gamit laban sa British, Inglaterra, ang pinakamalaking navy nung araw, natalo nila yung mga yan. Dahil sa lakas ng loob at dunong, at gumagawa sila ng sarili nilang barko. At yan ay nagawa nila. Hanggang umabot na tayo sa Japan, pare-pareho ang sinasabi niyan. Ang sikreto, enrich the country, strengthen the military. Kung hindi natin papayamanin ang bansa, wala rin mangyayari sa ating military at tayo will remain prostrate to attack by any other nation, Mr. President. Kung yung Amerikano, pinabayaan ni MacArthur yung mga planes natin sa Clark Field at nung sumusup ang Hapon, naandun sila sa gitna, natatakot sila na masabotahe, ganun rin sa Pearl Harbor, talagang naubos sila ng Hapon nung dumating ang Hapon dito. But later on, they became the arsenal of democracy, making ships every day. Hindi ko pa pinag-uusapan dyan yung mga ginawa ng kanilang submarino. Anong araw, mali-mali pa yung mga torpedong ginagamit. Talagang hindi makalubog ng barko, but nakabawi sila. Walang sisihan, walang investigasyon na ginawa. Basta humanap sila ng paraan, magawa. Dito po sa atin, I will remind you, not too long ago, bumili tayo ng helicopters. Helicopters na second hand na kunyari, pinagsama-sama. Wala pong lumipad dyan. Wala hong nangyari dyan. Ni investigasyon, hindi tayo nanalo. I'm sure the majority of our leader remembers that because I said that. There are about 30 helicopters, if I'm not mistaken, that were brought, I think, from another country. We were promised na merong middleman na gagamitin yung helicopter na yan. Eh wala akong lumipad at wala akong naimbestiga. At isulat mo na lang sa tubig para wala tayong gulo. But we cannot afford that, Mr. President. This country cannot afford that. I'm glad Secretary Lorenzana and even the President, I commend him because he is trying to raise the level of the military. He is trying to help the soldier and the police. Sometimes to excessive proportions because ang hinahanap ko rin naman, ayusin mo yung mga sundalo, pero lagyan naman natin ng gamit. Hindi makakalaban yung tao natin. Wala tayong submarines. Hindi naman ako military expert, pero yung mga kapitbahay natin, katulad ng Indonesia, katulad ng Vietnam, meron silang mga submarines. Ang Singapore, nakakaparinggit na bansa, mas marami silang C-130. They have the latest planes. I believe they even have the F-18 Hornets. And I'm seeing they're buying also the F-35s na tumataas, nakakakalipad na parang helicopter at lumilipad na jet. Eh yan ho, hindi natin ginagawa. Napakalayo ba sa ambisyon ng ating mga mamamayan niya? Kaya pag pinag-isipan natin ang mga Pilipino, mga kapatid, pag sinabi natin gagawa tayo ng kanal o tunnel dyan sa ilalim ng Pasig River o mangarap tayo na daglagyan natin ang tunnel dyan sa ilalim ng Cavite para makarating sa Manila na mabilis o makaroon ng tunnel patungo sa Bataan hanggang Subic, ang sasabihin niya, naku, walang mangyayari yan. Kukurakutin lang yan. Wala nang ambisyon. Jaded na ang tao. Kaya kailangan tayong mga Pilipino, sabihin natin talaga, tayong mga senador, isang pulutong tayo na talagang let's force ourselves to take an oath na talagang proteksyonan natin. We don't protect just the soldier. We protect our country. That is the issue here. And the country cannot remain like this. Remember when World War II happened? The Polish thought that they had all the military assets. They even had cavalry. They were fighting the First World War in World War II. Anong ginawa? They were decimated in less than a day by the blitzkrieg of the Germans. And when you talk about Shabu, when the Germans invaded France, kala nila tatagal lang buwan, wala pang 2-3 araw, pinikutan nila yung Maginot Line, gumamit sila ng mga bagong tangke, at alam po ba ninyo, gumamit pa ng Shabu. Yung mga Germans, pinakain sila ng Shabu para walang tulog, walang pagod, sugod na sugod, hilo-hilo ang Frances, at nung makapasok na sila, tapos na ang boxing, sumuko na ang Frances. Is that what we want in our country na isang lapit lang? Lagyan lang tayo ng Liaotung, yung aircraft carrier ng China. Abay, wala na tayo. Tingnan nyo ang Taiwan. Nag-iingat sila. Dumaan yung Liaotung, namili sila ng I think 200 jets if I'm not mistaken. High-performance jets ang binili ng Taiwan kagad. At pati nga itong Amerikano, bagay patapos na itong si Trump, si Pence sabi niya gano'n, didirekta na tayo sa Taiwan. Because nakikita nila, palagi ko nakikita niya rin ako, nakikita ko at least, nagkakalampagan na rito at maaaring magkagera dito sa Asia and the Pacific. Kaya pati Australia, nagpapakita ng gilas, pati Korea, nagpapakita ng gilas, pati Japan, meron silang aircraft carrier na maliit, helicopter carrier, pati Thailand, namili ng helicopter, ng aircraft carrier, yung alang ginagamit lang ng hari, o minsan-minsan pag nagku-cruise, dahil napakamahal, paanda rin. Pero may pakita silang lakas ng loob, na kung halimbawa magkalampagan, meron silang magagamit na aircraft carrier. Eh tayo po, ay nako, mahirap na lang po magsalita. At kaya nga na, ito ay gusto ko sabihin sa inyo, maraming kumakalat dyan sa Subic. Meron raw kinuha yung China na island, yung Grande Island. Diyan po yung recreation area, parang corregidor ng Subic yan. Merong nag-rent. Pero in the national interest, ang napag-uusapan po, hindi natin papayagan maglagay ng presence dyan sapagkat kung tayo ay magkakalampagan, ay makikita ng lahat kung ano nangyayari sa loob na talagang natural, may airfield, may seaport, may ship repair capability. That is a natural target kaya sino na andyan, sapagkat kung may kalaban tayo, bobombahin tayo. At kung wala tayong eroplano at ang panlaban natin ay pang-internal lang, talagang patay-patay tayo mga Pilipino. Again, I say, when are we going to wake up? You know, Churchill tried to wake up England. Meron sa kanila peace na lang tayo sa Germany. Hindi natin kaya, talo na ang France. Pero Churchill, with his words, conquered the Germans. By his words and by his rhetoric, he fired up the imagination and inspired the whole English people who were very comfortable in the fact that they have Fortress Berlin or Fortress England that will protect them by the ocean and by having a strong navy. Muntikana na sila. Nang hiram sila ng katakot-takot, nagbigay sila ng base militar sa mga Amerikano, yung Diego Garcia kasama dyan, yung kanilang mga sekreto binigay sa Amerikano para tumulong ang Amerikano. Wala hong binibigay ang Amerikano na libre, may kapalit lahat yan. Kaya kailangan, meron tayong pampalit na pera, meron tayong pampalit na gamit, na dunong, para matulungan. And that is what saved them. After the Battle of Britain, dumating lahat yung kanilang mga aeroplano. Yung kanilang mga bombers. Namatay pa yung kapatid ni President Kennedy sa isang raid dyan. I'm only taking this opportunity and I'm thank Senator Subiri for again waking me up from my stupor, from my relaxed feeling na we are safe. Nako, nakikita ko si Amy, ganda-ganda ni Amy. Pag dumating dyan bigla ang kalaban sa Lawag, o kaya sa Dagupan, o kaya dyan sa Leyte, o kaya pumunta dyan sa Davao, matataranta tayo, saan tayo pupunta, saan tayo pupulutin. And so today, Mr. President, more than the deaths, we can repay our soldiers who died, who keep dying on flying coffins, as Senator Subiri said. Na dapat repay, kailangan natin yan para hindi mahagip sa isang lugar yan. Lumalakad yung mga ating missile na pagdepensa sa China. Nilalahad ko lang po yung konting nalalaman ko rito, hindi para magpasikat, pero out of a sincere desire, out of a sincere plea, out of a sense na talaga, let us wake up to the reality. JFK, John F. Kennedy, wrote Why England Slept. That's a great book that he wrote. Alam nyo, yung tatay niya, maka-German. Pero si Joseph Kennedy, ang gusto niya accommodate si Hitler. Pero his son, Joseph Kennedy, wrote Why England Slept, and he lost a son, Joseph Kennedy, in a bomber raid somewhere in Europe, and they never got the body back. In other words, Mr. President, we all have to pay the supreme sacrifice and hope it doesn't happen to us. In World War II, Mr. President, nung maubos na lahat tayo, hindi naman tayo kinapos eh. Andyan yung mga Alfredo Ceres Burgos na lumaban sa Bataan. Ang kwento niya, yung kinakain ng Amerikano, mas masarap sa kinakain ng Pilipino. At titiisan nila yan. Andyan yung mga sundalo natin, yung mga Cabrera Brothers, na football player ng Ateneo, na lumaban. At nung pinipilit silang bumaliktad, sinaksak pa ng Hapon doon para sabihin niya kung sino yung mga kasama niya. Sabi ni Arsenio Lacson na sumunod ang kanyang short story about the Cabrera. Sabi niya, yung Cabrera na yan, kaliit-liit, lumalaban sa football. Bangga-banggain siya, nakatawa pa. At because siya ay writer, nakita ni Arsenio Lacson nung pinatay si Cabrera, at sabi sa kanya, maghukay ka na, at ililibing na namin, nakangiti si Cabrera, sabi niya sa hapon, you dig my grave, you're gonna kill me anyway, you dig my grave. At binayoneta siya. At nakita ni Lacson, sigurado siya, na nung namatay si Cabrera, nakangiti. Panalo ang Pilipinas kay Cabrera, kahit na pansamantalang natalo tayo. Sa madaling sabi, Mr. President, the future is now. We cannot wait for the future. We cannot wait for just crashes to remind us. They're mere reminders of the nightmare we're going to have if we do not prepare our country and our soldiers for the right equipment, Mr. President. And you know, I belong to masigasig class ng ng PMA. At nanonood ako, binabasa ko yung kanilang mga sinasabi. And I also was an officer in the ROTC. That's minuscule. Because yesterday, I was saying, kung yung mga nagbibigay tayo ng vaccination, dapat magturo tayo ng vaccinator. Kahit na tayo, matuto tayo mag-vaccinate. Hindi tayo kailangan mag-hire pa ng mga nurses, turuan lang, maganda tayo. Because in Israel, in Korea, in Singapore, their people can be called to battle at any time. And they must serve, not only in battle, but before they even finish college at a certain age, pumunta kayo sa Israel and you will see lovely looking lassos from Israel na naka M2 carbine pa nga ang gamit. Kahit anong baril ginamit nila. And need I remind you that when Israel got its independence, they were surrounded by a sea of Arabs and they fought very, very hard. I am deliberately speaking long, Mr. President, if only to wake up our people. Sabi nga ni Senator Subiri, may clear ang ating agenda ngayong araw na ito. Kaya payagan niyo ako magsalita ng konti dyan para lang magising ang ating bayan. At pati na ngayon si Ralph Rector, nakita ko nagising na rin. And alam ko susuporta yan. Yan ang maganda rito, nakikita tayong lahat, nakikita tayo, iba nakikinig. Hopefully, we can turn our words to action. Acta, non-verba. Panahon na talaga, Mr. President, umakto tayo. Tayo mag-react, let us be proactive and prepare for a long future. It might even be a short future para tayo ay hindi ini-small ng mga ibang bansa. Natagakuha lang tayo ng hand-me-down. Biro nyo, Mr. President, nagpadala tayo ng sundalo sa Korea. Camp Conrado Yap is named after a Sambaleño who fought in Korea and died, I think, in the Yultong Pass or there was a dam there where there was a battle. And you know what? He died while trying to save Boni Serrano, yung kanto dyan sa Camp Aguinaldo na Boni Serrano. Siguro, bako correct pa ako dito ni General Ronaldo Bato de la Rosa na yung kalye na yan pinangalan kay Boni Serrano na silang dalawa, ginapang ang sarili at nilabas sila pero namatay si Conrado Yap. Mr. President, I have no doubts that our President ay talagang ang ating military ay lalaban. Wala rin akong duda sa mga pulis natin. Konti lang yung mga nagluloko. But I remember Senator Teddy Boy Locsin saying to the President, sabi raw nung sundalo nung araw, Mr. President, your armed forces is ready to die to the last policeman. Nagbibiro siya. Pero hindi po totoo yun. Lahat lalaban yan, pati tayo siguro, ay talagang mag-aalsa pagka tayo ay susugurin. Malapit na ba yan or I'm just talking like a madman, a wild Cassandra, if you will? Na hindi mangyayari yan, malayo pa. I'm sorry, Mr. President. Priority natin ang national security and national capability. And on that note, Mr. President, I just pray and hope that we can realize our responsibilities, and I know you do, all of us do, and find the money that we can have not just a knee-jerk reaction to buy submarines or to buy something. I don't want to use the word sexy because that is gender bad, but I will say the right mix para unti-unti on a long run, we can finally have a military that we can have. So that Air Force, as I said in my debate during the bases, the Americans leave, our Air Force will be all air and no force. Our Navy will all be all coast and no guard. And Army will have a lot of men at arms, but no weapons. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Subiri, for really inciting my mind into really reacting and not just reacting, because you know, we've been studying this for a long time. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas, mabuhay ang Senado. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, may we recognize Senator Angara, Mr. President.
Senator Chani Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. I'd like to share the sentiments of our colleagues. First, regarding recognizing the sacrifices of our armed forces, our young soldiers giving their lives, the biggest sacrifice, Mr. President. And I commend the majority leader for giving this timely speech to recognize their efforts. And secondly, I share also the sentiments of our good majority leader, Senator Gordon, Senator De La Rosa, regarding the need to upgrade our Air Force and their assets. And for the record, Mr. President, for 2021 budget, we increased, despite the challenges in finding budgetary space, we increased the budget for the Air Force by 400 million. It's not a huge amount, Mr. President, but I think that was a Senate initiative in response to the agency requests. So I think we can build on that in the coming years. Hopefully, we can successfully fight COVID this year. And again, my commendation to the majority leader and our colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Senator Ngala. Majority
Yeah.
Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Yes, we will need the help of the chairman of the Committee on Finance for this. Definitely, we'll have to dig deep into our pockets because aircraft are very expensive. It costs about to get a decent helicopter for the armed forces, especially if you're a troop carrier. It would cost no less than $10 million to $10 million yan eh. At least about $10 million for brand new, and refurbished ones that are not that old will cost between $5 to $7 million, Mr. President. But they deserve it. All the lives lost because of these senseless accidents due to the wear and tear and age of our helicopters should not happen in the future. So much so, Mr. President, that we've gotten even donations from Jordan, for example, with the, as mentioned earlier by Senator Gordon, who is giving out models of different military hardware. We just got a donation of Cobra helicopter gunships from Jordan. But that, Mr. President, again, is Vietnam era, yung Cobra. Sana Apache na po tayo because even our neighbors such as Singapore and Malaysia, and if I'm not mistaken, even Indonesia use the Apache helicopters as their gunships. So maganda nga po sana na ma-modernize na po natin yung Air Force natin. The Navy is on track. They've been getting a number of ships, but yung Air Force, I think, is what we need to focus. And I believe the Senate is prepared. I'm sure all our colleagues in the Senate are prepared to make these institutional amendments for the Air Force in the near future, the next budget, Mr. President. So with that, Mr. President, to allow more discussions maybe on how we can ask the Air Force at how we can help as a Senate, may I move that the speech that I delivered together with Senator Bato de la Rosa and my dear friend and my ninong, Senator Dick Gordon, be referred to the Committee on National Defense, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. So referred.
And may we also, with the permission of Senator Angara, Mr. President, as a secondary committee, the Committee on Finance, Mr. President, so that they'll also be able to hear what the Air Force would need.
All right. So referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. Second to avail of the privilege hour, Mr. President, is our dear colleague from Cavite, our dear colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino. May we give him the floor, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Francis Tolentino, gentleman from Cavite, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Magandang hapon po. I rise on a question of personal and collective privilege, Mr. President. This will be short. Yesterday, following the speech delivered by my kababayan, Senator Ping Lacson, Senator Bongo delivered a quick manifestation. Thereafter, Senator Lacson, before yielding the floor, asked Senator Bongo a question: where do we secure lethal injection drugs? And the question ended without an answer. I proceeded to the seat of Senator Lacson and gave him my answer, which I am about to complete today, Mr. President. Ang sabi ko po kay Senator Lacson, ang mga gamot po ng pang-lethal injection ay galing sa Mexico. I cite a case, Mr. President, Cook versus Food and Drug Administration of the United States. And this has something to do with the doctrine and to show how strict, how reliable the US FDA is. And I will compare this situation later with the Philippine FDA. The doctrine of unsafe for human execution came about in that case. Ang nangyari po, Mr. President, merong mga preso sa death row sa Arizona, California, and Tennessee. Sila po ay nasa death row at malapit nang i-execute. Subalit, kagaya na pag-usapan namin ni Senator Lacson kahapon, magaling po yung abogado nila. Ang ni-raise po nila sa Supreme Court, nakaabot ng US Supreme Court, ay yung issue po ng sodium thiopental. Sodium thiopental is a drug which induces anesthesia, and a convict would like after be injected with poncorium bromide, which causes paralysis, and thereafter potassium chloride, which stops the heart. But the issue, Mr. President, is that the lawyers of these prisoners, these convicts, were able to stay the execution because the drug thiopental has no emergency use authorization. It was not yet authorized to be used by the US FDA, so there came the doctrine of unsafe for human execution. Makakamatay daw yung drug kaya wag mo nang gamitin, pero yung drug gagamitin talaga para sa lethal injection. I now go to my point, Mr. President. Yung US FDA, where we copied almost verbatim the provisions of our FDA law, ay nakakalungkot, and I mentioned this several months ago in my speech concerning the IRRs. Eto na naman po tayo, Mr. President. During the hearings conducted by the Committee of the Whole, and I am not demeaning the FDA. They're trying to do their best. But I think they are utilizing their functions in an inappropriate manner. That's why I'm entitling my speech as an authorized FDA discretion, Mr. President. Ang pinag-usapan po natin ng Committee of the Whole ay tungkol po sa issue kung pwede po ba ang local government units, ang private sector, na bumili ng sariling bakuna. Mr. President, prior to December 14, 2020, 35 days ago, the FDA issued several circulars allowing, in my reading, and this is my submission, allowing the procurement by the private sector, non-government controlled centralized procurement of vaccines, Mr. President. And I am referring to several issuances issued by the Food and Drug Administration, Mr. President. FDA Circular 2020-12-A, dated July 27, 2020. And there is an FDA Circular 2020-12-B, entitled Further Amendment to FDA Circular 2020-12, entitled Guidelines for Registration of Drug Products under Emergency Use, Drugs under Emergency Use, or DEU, dated August 26, 2020. And thereafter, FDA Circular 2020-036, entitled Guidelines on the Issuance of Emergency Use Authorization. Mr. President, dated December 14, 2020. Mr. President, prior to the word emergency use authorization, which is now being widely used, prior to its cropping up, Mr. President, the mantra of FDA, from the circulars that I mentioned, refers to drug products under emergency use. Hindi po nila ginagamit yung emergency use authorization. Wala po yun sa batas, Mr. President. Wala po yun sa Republic Act 9711. Wala po yun sa Republic Act 3720, the original act creating the Food and Drug Administration, Mr. President. These words, emergency use authorization, as I mentioned a while ago, cropped up following the issuance of Executive Order 121 coming from Malacanang. But if we take a look at Executive Order 121, it doesn't limit the procurement of vaccines to the national government, Mr. President. Ginawa lang po ito ng FDA, binago nila they issued before several circulars, including the circular that mentioned marketing authorization holders, MAH, Mr. President, just to show that they allowed before. They are allowing before the procurement of the private sector, the local governments, and other entities, Mr. President. But 35 days ago, December 14 to be exact, they issued a circular amending everything. They issued a circular mentioning for the first time emergency use authorization, which, Mr. President, I have a copy here, would show that it never even mentioned a centralized procurement system, Mr. President. So what is happening, Mr. President, now is the FDA issued circulars left and right, and thereafter belatedly amended its circular to include that words emergency use authorization, and thereafter interpreted their own circulars, which they would implement, Mr. President. I'm not trying to demean the FDA, but now it appears that the FDA is the legislator, the FDA is the executive, and the FDA is the judge as the interpreter, sole interpreter of the circulars that they issued. Mr. President, this is really a classic case of undue delegation of legislative powers, Mr. President. Ito po yung sinasabi ko na baka naman nasobrahan na. And we're not just dealing with an ordinary product, Mr. President. I've mentioned this during the budget hearings, Mr. President. How come they're now so strict in enforcing their own crafted emergency use authorization for a product that is being utilized in other countries when they have been reluctant to enforce their own rules here, Mr. President? I mentioned this during the budget hearing. For several decades, we have been ingesting, digesting, eating Rhino liver spread without a certificate of registration coming from FDA. We have been using Tiger Balm, Mr. President, without a certification coming from FDA. They just issued the certifications last year. And I just found out, Mr. President, and the websites would confirm this, that even our widely used Pantene shampoo has not been issued an FDA certificate. Bakit sobrang higpit nila dun sa produktong pwede namang bilhin ng local government units, pwedeng bilhin ng pribadong sektor, pero itong mga ginagamit na natin ay ayaw nilang higpitan. Mr. President, I'm citing all of this, including several provisions of the IRR of the FDA, which includes, Mr. President, ang nakalagay po sa batas, Republic Act 9711, the FDA Director General can have the power of contempt. Pero sa ginawa po nilang IRR, any official of the FDA can have the power of contempt, Mr. President. So again, that's a clear example, a classic example of FDA violating the law, issuing their own laws, interpreting their own laws, and implementing their own laws, Mr. President. I mention this, Mr. President, because it's about time. I'm not against FDA. After this pandemic, that we take a look at the regulatory regime where FDA exists. It's about time that we reform the regulatory regime. It's about time, perhaps, that we transfer FDA. I'm thinking of transferring it to the Department of Science and Technology, Mr. President, or clearly delineating the functions of FDA in such a way that they will not deviate from what is enumerated in the law. I have a lot of things to say here, Mr. President, but it pains me, Mr. President. However we look at it, all the circulars, they have no legal basis, Mr. President. This is the submission of this representation. The FDA cannot prevent other sectors from acquiring the vaccines based on their misplaced interpretation of a ruling they crafted, which is not pursuant to the laws given by the Congress, Mr. President. And to end, Mr. President, again, I do not mean to cast aspersion on the motives of the FDA, Kailangan po natin silang tulungan. Baka lang hindi nila naintindihan yung bakura ng kanilang kapangyarihan. The FDA right now, to end this, is trying to make validity of their own circulars. The FDA, to make the validity of FDA circulars, would depend on the readings of events still in the womb of time. A forecast that is of the outcome of forces at best appreciated only with the knowledge of topmost secrets of highly developed nations and elite drug laboratories, is to give our local FDA too much discretion beyond its equipment and what the law gave them, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to mention my piece, which should have been a double-headed manifestation yesterday. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Tolentino. As a matter of fact, I will ask the Senator, the Majority Leader, to refer your speech to the Committee of the Whole so that we may give the resource persons a copy beforehand and ask for their comments during the hearing that will be conducting on Friday. But just to sum up parts of your privilege speech, can we say that what you are espousing is that as far as FDA is concerned, yung makakagaling ng sakit, hindi pwede basta gamitin. Pero yung hindi na alam kung unsafe or safe, okay lang, sige lang. Parang ganun.
Mr. President, it appears from the IRR and the circulars that they issued, even the term misbranding, they redefined misbranding, Mr. President. I have my notes here. They extended too much the term misbranding in such a way that it is now more confusing, Mr. President. Even the term registration, Mr. President, because the submission of this representation is that the EUA is a form of registration itself. Because you submit, the drug companies will submit documents attesting to the clinical trials conducted, attesting to the efficacy and purity of the vaccine. So it's a form of registration. But the FDA would say that there is no registration yet, so we cannot allow others to procure the vaccine. But in their previous circulars, Mr. President, they are allowing, under their previous term, drug emergency use, DEU. Kaya-imbento lang po nila nitong emergency use authorization December 14. Before, ang ginagamit nila, DEU, binago po nila yan, kasi siguro may marketing doon, baka na may nag-question, and this is my speculation, they might have coursed this through the IATF and allowed the IATF to endorse the issuance of Executive Order 121. But if you read closely, Mr. President, Executive 121 does never mention that LGUs, the private companies, are not allowed. In fact, Mr. President, 121 mentioned the word such as the procuring agency. So it's not exclusive, Mr. President. So ngayon, nagkagulo-gulo na. Ang dinadahilan nila, kaya hindi pwedeng bumili ang LGU, ang private sector, kasi naka-EUA pa. Kayo rin na nag-imbento ng EUA. Kayo ang naging judge, kayo ang naging legislator, kayo rin na mag-implement. That's the convoluted situation we are in now. Pero ang sinasabi ko po, Mr. President, patapusin muna natin to, and then we overhaul the FDA law para makarating sa atin yung bakuna. Hindi po ito nangyari nung SARS epidemic, hindi po ito nangyari nung dengue. Yung sa dengue po, binigyan kagad nila yung Dengvaxia ng certificate of registration. Yung Ebola, hindi nakarating sa atin. H1N1, hindi sila nagbigay. Yung swine flu, wala rin pong ganun. Pero this is the first time that they're invoking that doctrine copied from the United States, which is more explicit because it even has the FDA of the United States, they even have the duration and scope as to the validity or the expiration of the emergency use authorization. Mr. President.
All right. One thing is sure. Your privilege speech has given more reasons to ask why. Why they are doing that. Anyway, the Senator Ping Lacson is recognized. He's on the floor, and then the Minority Leader, Senator Dilo.
With the permission of the Senate President and the gentleman from my home province, Cavite, what you're saying in effect is FDA is overstepping its mandate under the law that Congress, the powers that Congress gave them. My question is, what is its implication on the procurement of vaccines? Since you said that under the FDA law, there's no mention of the EUA being limited to the national government as the only authorized entity to procure or to purchase vaccines. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. The net effect probably is that our acquiescence, our tolerance, our acceptance through the budgetary process, and even our the words being extolled, modesty aside, here in this chamber, would probably give the imprimatur that what they're doing is right because of the recent events that showed that there were now negotiations about to terminate, consummated. So it does not make the actions of FDA void or voidable, but probably it is now being given an imprimatur on the part of the government, Mr. President.
In other words, Mr. President, had the FDA been compliant with the provisions of the law, of the FDA law, we wouldn't be in this situation where other countries have already been inoculating their citizens, and the Philippines seems to be lagging behind in our vaccination program. Because if we allowed the private sector and even the LGUs who are willing to spend their own money to inoculate their constituents and their employees, then we could have started already inoculating many of our countrymen, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President, because as I've mentioned, as early as July, August, and even the September circular I have here, they issued a circular 2020-028, September 22, wherein they mentioned market authorization holders allowed to import, manufacture, distribute drug products listed in their interim guidelines, and these are considered, quote unquote, drug products under emergency use for the pandemic. So pinapayagan po nila nung September. Tapos ngayon, iba na. So they changed the rules of the game, Mr. President.
Yeah. But how would you reconcile that with their statement, their assertion that drug manufacturers will not sell to private sector? They're only willing to sell to the national government.
Mr. President, they're probably confusing too much the connection between the COVAX Gavi facility with what the other entities can do. This is also signed by Director General Domingo, and I've been asking myself the question: what will prevent, Mr. President, the BARM?
Yes.
The BARM having their own Department of Health and probably creating their own FDA from purchasing their own vaccines, Mr.
Yeah.
President. They're allowed.
Say AstraZeneca or
Yes, Mr. President.
Sinovac or Sinopharm or Moderna, whatever.
Yes, Mr. President. So this is very confusing because several circulars changing the nomenclature from drug products under emergency use for coronavirus to now emergency use authorization, a term which is just 35 days old, Mr. President.
I would just like to put on record that this representation would like to commend the distinguished gentleman from Cavite for his wonderful research work, because on Friday, we'll have some materials to chew on, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I answered my colleague from Cavite, Mr. President, as to the thiopental lethal injection drug, which was not allowed by the FDA of the US because, which was not allowed by the prison authorities of Arizona because it does not yet have the appropriate FDA approval because they claim it unsafe for human execution.
So to allow a lethal vaccine or injection, they should not be lethal enough to put the did that convict to sleep?
No, no,
Is
Mr.
that the
President.
implication?
No, Mr. President, because I mentioned 3 steps. The sodium thiopental,
Yes,
which induces anesthesia,
Yeah.
and then the chromium bromide, which causes
Paralyze.
paralysis, and then the potassium
Stop the heart.
chloride stops the heart.
So, among the 3, ano yung walang EUA authorization o walang EUA from US FDA?
Thiopental, Mr. President, because
Yung pang anesthesia.
yes, Mr. President.
Ah,
But
baka
I think by this time
it makes sense, Mr. President. Mahirap mapatay ng hindi tulog.
It's the biggest oxymoron of the day.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hindi binigyan ng authority dahil hindi nakakamatay.
And the term used by the U.S. Supreme Court, Mr. President, is that the drugs being unapproved were therefore unsafe for human execution.
Unsafe for human execution, huh? All right. Anyway, the minority leader is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Will the good gentleman from Cavite yield to a few clarificatory questions?
More than willingly, Mr. President, to the minority leader.
First of all, let me place on the record my congratulations to the gentleman from Cavite for bringing this issue to the floor, because I myself, I am a lawyer. I have been in government for quite some time. I still do not understand the parameters of the power of the FDA. As the gentleman from Cavite correctly said, the FDA issues its own regulation. It interprets its own regulation and acts as a judge. And maybe such regulation is even beyond the powers granted to it by law. So just to clarify matters, Mr. President, can the good gentleman spread into the record exactly what are the powers of the FDA under the law? And to be more specific, can any drug be used in the Philippines without the approval of the FDA? And is an emergency use authority within its powers under existing legislation?
Mr. President, as I mentioned a while ago, the exact word emergency use authorization is not enshrined in Republic Act 9711, dated August 18, 2009, but there is a proviso there that it can issue standards. The meat of my privileged speech, Mr. President, is that they suddenly change not just the nomenclature from a drug under emergency use, the EU, to now EUA, overnight, after issuing consecutive circulars, perhaps allowing the private sector or even the LGUs to purchase. But it would now appear that what is not included in the law is now part of their IRR through the incremental circulars that they have been issuing left and right, Mr. President. They're now redefining what is within the scope of their powers, Mr. President. And I just, as I mentioned a while ago, even the power to cite for contempt was just lodged in the Director General, and they issued an IRR. Any official of the FDA can now issue that power. But again, I reiterate, I am not demeaning the FDA. Siguro kulang lang sila sa tao dahil alam niyo po, Mr. President, with the permission of the minority leader, meron din po silang enforcement power, meron silang mga police. Ewan ko, na-create na nila yon, and they can arrest dealers of misbranded, adulterated drug products. Ang naging problema lang, Mr. President, yung kinukwento ko kanina, for several decades, I've been eating Reno liver spread. Last year lang nabigyan ng product certificate of product registration, Mr. President. So I hope I have answered the query of the gentleman from Iloilo, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a very specific question. Can a drug be legally administered in the country without an emergency use authorization, or drug emergency use, whatever is the term. In other words, some positive act on the part of the FDA. Is it necessary before a drug is administered or used in our jurisdiction?
Mr. President, the utilization of a drug, because there are two types. In another jurisdiction, there are two types of emergency use, Mr. President. Emergency use of an unapproved drug, which is probably approved in another jurisdiction, and the emergency use of a drug which has applied for a registration or certificate in the Philippines. So, yung tanong niyo po, to be direct, pwede bang gamitin? Hindi po. Hindi po pwedeng gamitin yung walang FDA certification or approval, but how to enforce that is another matter, Mr. President.
So the answer is no.
Yes, Mr.
For
President.
drugs which are unapproved, it cannot be used or administered in the Philippines. And the other one is if there is no application for emergency use, it cannot be applied and utilized in the Philippines. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President. Not just this is not just about drugs, but even food items, Mr. President. Your junk foods, your soft drinks, and other food items that intended for human consumption, including beverages, chewing gum, any substances used as an ingredient, they have to have FDA approval, Mr. President. Kaya nga, sinasabi ko, baka kulang talaga sa tao, Mr. President, kasi yung Reno liver spread, matagal na natin ginagamit, decades na, and then yung Pantene shampoo, hanggang ngayon wala pa, Mr. President. Marami nang gumagamit na shampoo nun for the last several decades.
So,
And I'm sure, Mr. President, somewhere out there, there are still other famous products without FDA certification, Mr. President.
and such the use within our jurisdiction of such medicine, food products, cosmetics, whatever, without FDA approval is unauthorized and illegal.
And punishable by law, Mr. President.
Yes, okay. Now, Mr. President, we read in the newspapers yesterday or the day before yesterday that the president of China donated 500,000 doses or vials of vaccine. Do you recall that, Mr. President?
I read that, Mr. President. May we have the query, Mr. President?
Yes. Can this be used, assuming that this news release is true, can this be used now in the Philippines?
Mr. President, may I just interject?
Objection, if allowed by Senator Tolentino and Senator Dilon, Senator Lacson.
Yes, Mr.
There is already a statement coming from FDA, and I'd like to read the statement. Earlier today, the Department of Health may accept COVID-19 vaccines donated by other countries and use them at its own discretion, even if the products are not registered in the Philippines. So that's a clear violation of the FDA law. Are you saying?
Mr. President, I have yet to read the statement emanating from FDA, but it would appear that the acceptance of the FDA as to the utilization of said vaccine is itself the approval. Under the law, the approval need not be written. It can be in writing, in oral, Mr. President. And to invoke again what happened to Indonesia, Mr. President, as of December, Mr. President, 34 provinces of Indonesia were supplied by Sinovac with the vaccines to have the simultaneous vaccination last Wednesday, headed by President Widodo. So that's a different regime, but I think they have done this before in other jurisdictions, supplying even without approval. And the approval, the EUA for Indonesia was given on the eve of the vaccination, which is Tuesday. Mr. President, of last week, and the vaccination was Wednesday. So I'm not familiar with the negotiations, the terms of the foreign minister's donation and the acceptance by the Philippines. But my submission, Mr. President, is that the concurrence of the FDA, either through text or through a press release, connotes the approval. But they have to follow. They have to follow, as what Senator Pimentel mentioned yesterday. They have to follow the process being applied to other applicants, Mr. President. They have to submit the requirements from medical journals, the results of clinical trials, the random double-blinded trials, etc., Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
President.
go ahead, Senator Dillon.
Yes. Yes, in relation to the intervention of Senator Lacson, may I read into the record, and I'll ask for the comment of the good sponsor, what appears in media today. It says, quote, "The Philippines may accept and use coronavirus vaccines donated by China even without the approval of the Food and Drug Administration." FDA Director General Eric Domingo said this on Tuesday, citing the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, which allows the Department of Health to accept donated medications as long as it is registered from its country of origin. Its use, however, should be under the supervision of the Department of Health, the FDA chief noted. So, can we have your comment on this, Mr. President? I mean, the comment of the good sponsor on this. It would appear that these drugs donated does not have any form of approval for use. Wala mo ng emergency use authorization, nothing. But the FDA is now saying it can be used under the supervision of the Department of Health. In other words, the vaccines can now be distributed to our regional hospitals under the supervision of the Department of Health and used without the authorization of the FDA. Is that what it means, Mr. President? Would a good sponsor, in his, given the fact that he has studied the powers of the FDA, and I'm impressed by the width of the research done, may we know what is is it legally correct for the FDA to allow the use of the drugs donated from China when the same has not even been issued an emergency use authorization by the FDA?
Yes, Mr. President, I'm not privy to any discussions here, but I'm sure that the FDA would, as a judge, interpreter, lawmaker, and implementer, follow the FDA regulations they crafted themselves and the Indonesian model, perhaps on the eve of the vaccination, because they would be issuing an EUA, because there's a big difference between accepting the donation and inoculating the populace with the accepted donated vaccines, Mr. President. So if the FDA is listening, I appeal, I plead that they study the drugs donated, and thereafter, if found appropriate, issue the appropriate EUA, Mr. President, to make this all legal, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Minority Leader, with the permission of the Minority Leader.
Yes.
All right, Senator Recto, the President Pro Tem is recognized.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, I'm concerned, Mr. President, because the Minority Leader read an article earlier and Senator Lacson from Cavite also read an article earlier. One, that 500,000 doses have been donated to the Philippine government. Okay. Two, that the FDA said that the Department of Health, even without this emergency use, that these vaccines can be used immediately. Okay. Three, the third point, Mr. President, isn't it that our health workers are the frontliners? Meaning to say, ang unang i-inoculate ay yung mga health workers natin. Okay? Now, shouldn't it be that the most effective and the safest vaccine be given to our health workers? If the FDA has not been able to study yet any of these vaccines, okay, why should we allow a vaccine which in the news has come out to be less than 50% effective be given to our health workers? Now, I'm saying that because there is a timeline that I recall the Secretary Galvez mentioned that by February, we will start inoculating. Okay? At kung unang dumating, let's say Sinovac, okay, na hindi pa dumadaan sa FDA, and the first in line to be inoculated would be our health workers. Sa madaling salita, gagamitin yung Sinovac sa mga health workers natin. Okay? Palagay ko maling rollout yan, Mr. President. Dahil dapat ang binibigay natin sa health workers natin na frontliner ay yung pinaka-safe at pinaka-effective na bakuna para magkaroon ng mass buy-in ang mga taong bayan. Dahil kung yung hindi pinakamahusay ang ibibigay natin, kung tanggihan ng ating mga health worker yan, edi umpisa pa lang ng rollout, may problema na. Wouldn't that be a correct assumption to the gentleman from Cavite? Hindi ba nakakabahala yan?
Yes, Mr. President, I agree with our colleague from Batangas, and to add to my previous answer to the previous query raised by the minority leader, there is another way for FDA to do this, Mr. President. Rather than issuing an emergency use authorization, they can issue a compassionate special permit, Mr. President. A compassionate special permit is allowed for unregistered COVID-19 vaccines, and it can be distributed anywhere in the Philippines, even without an EUA, Mr. President. Again, this is another pathway for the FDA, because I'm really now confused with the various pathways. So we now have CSP, compassionate. So if our friend from Batangas is saying unahin na yung mga frontliners, they can probably invoke that compassionate special permit, because
yes, this is
but
my
I
point,
agree with
Mr.
you.
President.
The best
Just one
medicine,
last-
the best
Yes.
vaccine should be given to them.
Yes, the point I'm trying to drive at, nababahala lang ako, Mr. President, because I think that we should give our frontliners, our health workers, our doctors, our nurses, the best possible vaccine available in the market. Huh? If we do it that way, then there is a better chance kung ang doktor natin at nurse natin nagpabakuna, maniniwala ang taong bayan na sila din pwede magbakuna. Makikinig sa ating mga doktor at nurse. Isipin natin kung yung doktor at nurse ayaw magpabakuna dahil tingin nila hindi ganun ka-effective o safe yung bakunang ibibigay sa kanila, masama na kaagad yung umpisa na rollout natin. Likewise, Mr. President, they deserve to have the best possible, the most effective, the best body armor, the safest vaccine available in the market. Kung kaya dapat binibilis-bilis din ng FDA ang pag-aaral nila which vaccines would be most suitable for the Filipino, which will be the best for our frontliners, and which will be the best for the Filipino. So that is it, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to the minority leader.
Yes.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of the minority leader,
Another suggestion, Senator Tolentino, is
Yes, Mr. President.
the vaccines, the vaccine that they have, that they're authorizing to be used even without their official authority, be used on them first.
What?
Be you.
Sila unahin yung nag-import tsaka yung nagsasabing pwede.
Mr. President, with the indulgence
Mr.
of
Pre-
the
what-
minority leader and the gentleman from Cavite,
Mr. President,
All right.
before the gentle lady would interject, I would like to add the third pathway, Mr. President. There is a third pathway. The FDA Director General is authorized to accept regulatory decisions of the WHO, the U.S. Center for Disease and Communications, and other internationally recognized and established regulatory agencies. So if there is a group utilizing, accepting the Chinese vaccine, and this would probably include Brazil, United Arab Emirates, I think that would suffice for the internationally recognized and established regulatory agencies. And to answer the gentleman from Batangas, the jury is still out there, Mr. President. The jury is still out there. We don't know for sure which is the best vaccine, which has the least side effects, Mr. President. So we cannot be sure which vaccine should be procured and given to our frontliners. That's my submission, Mr. President.
All right, Senator Antiveros, with the permission of the minority leader.
thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the minority leader and to the gentleman from Cavite. Mr. President, kanina po, bahagi ng privilege speech ng gentleman from Cavite na baka nag-overstep ng mandate nila under the law ang Food and Drug Administration. Sinagot din naman ng gentleman from Cavite sa minority leader na bawal, hindi pwede na may gamiting gamot, pagkain, ibang produkto na walang pagpapayag ng FDA. Sinabi din ng gentleman from Cavite na baka may isa pang pathway, yung compassionate use permit, at meron silang isa pang sinabing legal pathway sa ngayon. Actually, Mr. President, at this point in time, and I say this heeding the cautionary tone being set by the minority leader and sharing the concern of the Senate President pro tempore. On my part, Mr. President, I would even say alarm, dahil bilang magulang, hindi ko papayagan noon yung mga anak ko, nung baby sila, mabakunahan ng walang tatak, kumbaga pag-aapruba ng FDA. Actually, Mr. President, the FDA is not without legal mandate even now, because I read in an even earlier article, Mr. President, CNN Philippines published December 2, that the President allows the FDA to issue emergency use authorization for COVID-19 vaccines and drugs. So kahit hindi pa tayo satisfied sa Senate that they are within their legal mandates under the law, meron naman pala pong executive action ang Presidente allowing FDA to issue EUAs para sa mga vaccines, partikular sa panahon ngayon ng COVID-19 pandemic. And I just like to make of record at this point, Mr. President, that I hope i-rethink naman ng FDA yung napaka-peligrosong policy position nila sa ngayon na pwedeng gamitin ng anumang vaccine kung wala pa silang pag-aapruba. It would be really, I think they need to recover some degree of responsibility and authority over this. Dahil kung hindi nila gagawin yun, Mr. President, sino ang magbabantay kung alin ang mga ligtas, epektibo na vaccines para sa ating bansa ngayong panahon ng pandemic? Salamat po, Mr. President. Salamat sa minority leader. Salamat sa gentleman from Cavite.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I may make a quick retort, Mr. President, I have here a copy of the cited executive order, and it would show that very clear here, Mr. President, that the executive order never mentioned the word LGUs and the private sector being prohibited from procuring, Mr. President. Number two, and that the emergency use authorization is valid until within the duration of the public health emergency due to COVID-19. So once the COVID-19 emergency expires, wala na po yung emergency use authorization. So just to clarify, some of the powers being cited by the FDA is not even contained in the Executive Order 121 coming from Malacanang.
Mr. President, if I may, what the gentleman from Cavite has just said, in fact, makes the point na mayroong authority at mayroong accountability ang FDA vis-a-vis yung ating mga vaccines precisely within this period of the COVID-19 pandemic. So huwag po sana nilang bitawan yung responsibilidad na iyon, bantayan yung kaligtasan at kalusugan ng ating populasyon with those statements cited by the Minority Leader and the Senate President pro tempore na pwedeng gamitin ang mga donated na mga vaccines kahit wala pa silang pag-authorize. Salamat, Mr. President.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, Mr. President.
Minority Leader, go ahead.
Yes. I regret that this issue has brought so much confusion even from among our colleagues. And, the confusion is caused by the members of the executive branch itself. And let me continue and read what is written in the news media, quoting Mr. Domingo. He said, quote, "Ang Department of Health po maaari siyang tumanggap ng mga gamot na hindi rehistrado sa atin," Domingo said during the televised Laging Handa public briefing. Sa Bayanihan Act din po nakalagay yun na pwede tayong tumanggap ng gamot na registered sa home country. Basta, of course, it will be used under the supervision of the Department of Health. So, Mr. President, I'm really confused. What is now the law? Would the use of any drug, would the authority of the FDA be necessary before the drug is used? I would like to say yes. Now, in this particular case, it would appear that the vaccines will not have the authority of the FDA, and the FDA now says as long as it is the Department of Health allows it, it is okay. So I hope that the good gentleman from Cavite, who correctly brought this out, can now clarify this chamber exactly where we are in terms of the use and authority of the unregistered drugs, because right now it is that I think no drug has been issued. An EUA probably, although I read that Pfizer has been granted. But in the donation by the Chinese official, technically has not been issued an EUA, but the director of the FDA, Mr. Domingo, said it's okay, it can be used if under the supervision of the Department of Health. Ang Department of Health, why is he above the law? By tradition, the FDA would allow, would issue EUAs from where the emergency use authorization is issued from any jurisdiction with matured regulatory agencies. That's the useful phrase. Matured regulatory agencies like the US, the European Union, Australia, Singapore, Japan, Switzerland, or Sweden. But in this particular case, none of the Chinese vaccines have been granted EUAs. And why should the FDA chief say that it can be used provided it is under the supervision of the Department of Health? This is a very dangerous position Mr. President, with all due respect, because then the public confidence in the vaccination process will never be enhanced by such confusing statements. We must reiterate that only 47% of our people would want to be vaccinated. Eh pag ganito pa na pwedeng ang frontliner, sabi nga ni Senator Recto, dapat bigyan sila ng pinakamagaling. If there is even no evidence of efficacy and safety because it has not been issued any EUAs in jurisdictions with matured regulatory agencies, how can we enhance and improve the confidence level of our people on the vaccine in general, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I agree with the minority leader that there should be no distinction between donated vaccines without prior emergency use authorization and vaccines that will be used, Mr. President. Perhaps the FDA Director General is trying to place a demarcation line between the ability of the FDA to accept donations and the legality of vaccines accepted as donations to be used without EUA. But Mr. President, I think just as the minority leader is confused, I join him in this setup of confusing state, Mr. President. I know for a fact that before a vaccine or drug is cleared by the Bureau of Customs, it has to be cleared by the FDA. I do not see any reason why we have to deviate from this standard. But because probably of this emergency right now, terms like authorized for investigational purposes, terms for manufacturing, there perhaps may be an opportunity to reverse engineer this, Mr. President, but not the 500 vaccines. Terms such as intended to be held and not immediately used, Mr. President. And I surmise that it is part of a grand diplomatic tool, Mr. President, because the offer came from another sovereign country. The foreign minister visited us, offered a donation, and this was affirmed by the good Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary Locsin. So it's a diplomatic tool rather than just a mere vaccination process, Mr. President. So I am not privy to the discussions, and my little knowledge of diplomacy would probably be small compared to the giant mind of the minority leader as well as the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So if we total all of these things, Mr. President, again, my conclusion is that I'm also confused.
Well, Mr. President, our confusion can lead to dangerous consequences because if we are to accept the proposition of the FDA, then we can dispense with the emergency use authorization as long as it is donated by a sovereign country and under the interpretation of the Food and Drug Administration, whether or not the drugs can be used or the vaccines can be used is a decision of the Department of Health. And let me quote from the news, from the media reports. Domingo, quote, pero decision po nila, DOH, yun kung tatanggapin po nila at gagamitin nila. I thought all the while that, the good gentleman is asserting that FDA is exercising powers which are doubtful under the law. But here, it would appear to me that FDA is precisely saying, as long as it is approved by the Department of Health, pwede yun. And again, I would repeat, given the opinion of 47 or the fear or the apprehension of the 47% of our people saying that they are apprehensive about having vaccination because of issues on safety and efficacy. This does not help any because dito wala nang permit eh. Basta galing lang sa DOH, pwede na. At pwedeng mag-utos ang DOH na gamitin itong gamot na ito na walang authority from the FDA. Tama po ba yun, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I have yet to read the news article, but I think, Mr. President, the FDA now being alert as to the discussions that this chamber had for the last several weeks would probably be constrained to follow the law. Although the mother agency of the FDA is the Department of Health, and it is not mere the command and control structure that they can invoke, but I think the FDA would eventually issue an EUA. That's my speculation here, and the Department of Health would probably ask for an EUA because the EUA is issued upon the application of the manufacturer or the procurer. This time it is the donee that should apply for the application, and the donee is the DOH, the donor being a foreign country. So it's the same. It's in the same household, Mr. President. I think they would follow the law. That's just my speculation, Mr. President. And probably during the next committee of the whole hearing, all of these things will be clarified, Mr. President.
Mr. President, with the permission of the good Senator from Cavite and the Minority Leader, Mr. President.
Senator Pangilinan is recognized.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think the trouble here would be two provisions of Bayanihan 2. Section 4, which refers to the President's accepting donations or the power of the President. Procurement, allow me to read that. First, Section 12. Procurement of COVID-19 drugs and vaccines. So this refers to vaccines. Notwithstanding any law to the contrary, the requirement of phase 4 trials for COVID-19 medication and vaccine stipulated in the Universal Health Care Law is hereby waived to expedite the procurement of said medication and vaccine, provided, and this was mentioned earlier by Senator Tolentino, that these are recommended and approved by the WHO, World Health Organization, and or other internationally recognized health agencies, provided further that the minimum standards for the distribution of the said medication and vaccine shall be determined by the FDA and HTAC, as may be applicable. Provided furthermore that nothing in this act shall prohibit private entities from conducting research, developing, manufacturing, importing, distributing, or selling COVID-19 vaccine sourced from registered pharmaceutical companies subject to provisions of this act, existing laws and regulations, provided finally that this section shall remain in effect 3 months after December 19, 2020. So this is the section that refers to vaccines. There is another section, Section 4, which refers this time to response and recovery interventions. And if I may be allowed to place this on record, pursuant to Article 4, Section 23, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, the President is hereby authorized to exercise powers that are necessary and proper to undertake and implement the following COVID-19 response and recovery interventions: ensuring that donation, acceptance, and distribution of health products intended to address the COVID-19 pandemic are not necessarily delayed, and that health products for donation duly certified by the regulatory agency or their accredited third party from countries with established regulation shall automatically be cleared. And then provided that this shall not apply to health products which do not require a certification or clearance from the FDA.
we submit, Mr. President, that these health products intended to address COVID-19 are different from vaccines. In other words, there is a specific provision of the law that refers to vaccines and its procurement. And this section 4 pertains to other health products and does not pertain to the vaccines. This is our. I think this is precisely the intention of the legislators when we enacted the law. Health products such as PPEs, such as masks, and other items necessary for the COVID response, Mr. President. This we submit, Mr. President, and therefore the interpretation of the FDA, we believe, is not consistent with the intent of the Senate and Congress.
Yes, Mr. President, that's the core of my speech, Mr. President. The unbridled tendency of the FDA to go beyond the parameters of their power. So, Mr. President, I am in agreement. But statements coming from FDA would now seem to correct itself, like the FDA chief. I was given now a statement said that the donation of vaccines will not influence the agency to approve the emergency use authorization, and that the FDA will not issue an EUA until a process is completed. So again, there is a big difference now. I'm not defending the FDA. I'm supposed to deliver a speech about the some unusual practices of the FDA. So what the FDA here is saying is that there should be a distinction between the donation and its use, Mr. President. And as cited by Senator Pangilinan, the Bayanihan law was even cited by the latest issuance of FDA, Circular 2020-036. And just again, Mr. President, the whole premise here is to watch the FDA. If they're doing good, let's support FDA. If not, let us correct FDA. But at the end of this pandemic, Mr. President, I submit that we overhaul the FDA law. And again, I repeat my earlier assertion that we transfer FDA to the Department of Science and Technology, and we make, or perhaps some can argue that it should be placed under the DTI because of the food manufacturing and consumer-related activities. Pag-aralan po yan, Mr. President. But the present setup, medyo confusing talaga, Mr. President.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of the two gentlemen, Mr. President.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Mr. President, I just want to proceed from what Senator Pangilinan said because he mentioned the two provisions of the Bayanihan law. And I do recall Senator Pia is listening. She was the one who really put in that provision on the exemption from the UHC for the vaccines. That was specific to vaccines, and that was in order to do advanced procurement para hindi tayo maiwan sa kangkungan. Mr. President, kahit kasi under the UHC very strict eh. Kailangan matapos na po yung stage 4 trials before we can even commence the procurement process. So Senator Pia was very adamant that yun lang ang i-exempt natin in order that we could move at the same time while conducting the trials, hindi ma-prejudice. Kumbaga, the government was moving together. And tama po si Senator Kiko na yung sa provisions that he read, the second provision he read, refers to non-vaccine COVID-related hospital equipment, etc., PPEs. Kasi nga yun, at the time, yung intention doon, wag naman patagalin yung pagpasok po sa Pilipinas dahil at the time, there was a shortage. So it's important to know the context of these provisions, Mr. President, in order to interpret. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, can I reclaim the floor and yield it? I have a few more questions. I can yield the floor after a few minutes. Because my trend of thought gets disrupted with so many. So with the indulgence of my colleagues, can I just... Yes. Now, Mr. President, the people listening to us now, I can bet you, is totally confused. So can we get a categorical answer? Can the vaccines donated by the Foreign Minister of the People's Republic of China be used without an emergency use authorization issued by the FDA? In other words, is the FDA correct or is it wrong when it said that the Department of Health can allow the use of these donated vaccines? Can we have a categorical answer from an opinion of somebody who studied this extensively, Senator Tolentino? Can we have a categorical answer? I can have, let's
Yes, Mr. President, the
guide
answer is no.
our people.
The answer is no, Mr. President. There has to be an emergency use authorization or a compassionate special permit, Mr. President.
Okay, so it is not allowed under the present state. I mean, the use of these vaccines donated is not allowed under our present law without the emergency use authorization, and therefore the statement of the FDA Director General is without basis. At least I got that from the good gentleman. And with that, Mr. President, I can now yield the floor to my other colleagues who would want to raise questions. Thank you very much, sir.
Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to confirm Senator Angara's statement that Section 12 is the special provision that we provided in Bayanihan 2 to address the procurement of vaccines, of the COVID vaccine. So in other words, we specifically put it there to allow the procurement even without phase 4 trials, because as Senator Angara correctly pointed out, this is a requirement in the Universal Healthcare Law. So without that provision, Section 12, we will not be able to procure siguro up to next year pa, 2 years from now, because phase 4 clinical trials take a very long time. So, as I was saying during the hearings, the past 2 hearings, what FDA has been asking of us is to cloak them now with authority to grant a authorization. It could, I suppose, a certificate of product registration if we want to authorize them based only on temporary phase 3 trials, because that's all we have. So let me clarify again that there is also confusion that we have phase 3 trials ready, available. They're not ready. All that is ready are some preliminary data. And countries all over the world have chosen to make their decisions based on the preliminary data of phase 3. But phase 3 is not complete anywhere. I remember asking this question and it was answered. I didn't ask the question. I made that statement, but WHO, we can call them again, answered in a way that made it appear that phase 3 trials have been completed in other countries. They have not been. They are ongoing, but other countries have based their decision to make it available in their countries and issue an EUA based on those tentative or preliminary phase 3 trial details. And I've seen the results of some being compared, and it's really difficult, no, because you'll see merong result na isa o dalawang tao ang apektado out of a few 100,000. You cannot make conclusions based on 1 or 2 people who got a side effect. It's very difficult. That's why it takes months and years. So having said that, talagang the onus is on FDA, because like FDAs all over the world, they will now have that position that I never want to find myself in basically clearing a product without the usual studies that they are accustomed to have. I'm not trying to take sides here, but I'm just trying to help us all see that reality. All over the world, this is the limited data that regulatory agencies are faced with. So they make a choice based on that. Now, as to the statement of FDA Director General Domingo, I have not talked to him. I would recommend that he's called into the hearing to clarify this. But I'm just surmising that given the donation, similar to what our good colleague Senator Tolentino, who gave an excellent presentation of the issues we are faced with, surmised also that because of diplomatic ties, he may have been constrained to say, well, based on Bayanihan law, we have Section 4 that allows the president to authorize the expedient, what do you call this, delivery of these products. He may not be privy, but ask him yourself, to the nuances that we intended that to be the general clause for, general health products, but specific to vaccines. I recall exactly the same as Senator Angara, the chair of the Committee on Finance, that is the provision that governed it. On that note, if I may, with your indulgence, dear colleagues, I just want to also put on record that hindi naman tayo nagkukulang sa experts, no? FDA, their job is to evaluate safety and efficacy. CHTAC, it is worth noting that they're the only ones, they're the ones who are supposed to look at the viability or the efficiency of a product for government purchase. Yun yung role ni HTAC. So if HTAC would say, ang mahal niyan pero mas effective, go, worth it. It doesn't matter na mas mahal yan. Or on the other hand, they might say, mas mura nga yan pero ang hirap i-transport, so it may not be a good purchase, no? So sila yung nagbibigay ng ganong klaseng advice. Plus, they also weigh in to ensure that there are no political and commercial biases. So I don't know, they might have a say here, no? Kasi that's their specific role mandated by law. And then we have the vaccine experts panel. Their job is to review all applications for studies. It was in the news a few days ago that we have agreed, I think yesterday, we have agreed to have Sinovac studies conducted here. So I'm assuming that the vaccine expert panels had a say on that. No, they decide, is it ethical? May potential ba talaga yan, or is it not worth our effort to pursue it? And then there's another agency, it's called NITAG, National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, and they're the ones that are very powerful in other countries. They actually track the progress of a vaccine as it's going along. So my point here is, marami talagang expert. I think talagang mahirap for us because we don't even have a doctor in the Senate, no? And even let me apply caution there also. Not any doctor is an expert on this as well. So I think tama lang na in our next hearing, we call these experts and have them weigh in on it. And I'd like to still assume, I think the good sponsor, maybe he can make a quick, quick, or it's up to him, response that, perhaps does he share my observation that to a certain extent, FDA is between a rock and a hard place, no? Because like I said, they do not have the data that they normally would need to make a conclusive recommendation or decision on this. And number two, things are happening fast, like there are donations, and siya na nga nagsabi na diplomatically, baka syempre nakakahiya naman sabihin na hindi, pero job din naman talaga ng FDA yan at some point to lay down our processes. But I don't know if maybe out of deference to DOH, tinuro niya yung Section 4. And one last thing, and then I yield the floor to the sponsor once more. The law RA 3720 that His Honor cited actually has a very general provision. Let me just read it. It is a very general provision that gives the authority to FDA to develop and issue standards and appropriate authorizations that would cover health products. So I'm assuming that itong EUA na in-issue nila that they created by way of rules internally is based on that power. So I just leave that for the body's information, and His Honor is free to comment on it. But I'd like to thank him for a very well-researched privilege speech. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
Senator
President.
Tolentino,
Mr. President, I agree with the senator from Taguig that there is indeed a provision there, which is a very broad provision. But the point that I raised earlier, a few hours ago, Mr. President, is that they keep on changing not just the nomenclature, but the scope. Because prior to the EUA, they called it DEU, Drug Products Under Emergency Use, and it appears from my readings on this is that because there is a marketing authorization, even the private sector would be allowed. Now, when they change it to EUA, their interpretation, as shown by the Committee of the Whole hearings, is that there is only one procuring entity because it is under EUA. So that adds up to the confusion. But again, Mr. President, I think all the interjections I correct. I just want to add one controversial item, Mr. President. From all the vaccines being developed right now, it appears that they are doing away with phase 4 clinical trial. Once you reach 40,000, that's about it. So the phase 4, from my readings, correct me if I'm wrong, and modesty aside, I'm just reciting this, is that phase 4 would now involve the recalling, the revocation. If it turns out that the product or the vaccine is unsafe or other side effects, negative side effects would ensue. So if it is commercially distributed, if it is a medicine, for example, a headache medicine, the phase 4 would include the marketing phase, and it would be subject to recall, revocation, or disallowance for distribution or even advertisement. But this being part of the Bayanihan Law, I guess we have to stand by this. But my readings would show that beyond phase 3, there will be no more clinical, double-blinded, randomized trial, Mr. President. So thank you for raising that point, Mr. President.
Mr. President, can I just continue what the good sponsor was mentioning about phase 3?
Senator Cayetano.
Yes. Just for our better understanding, it just so happened that I had asked that question. Phase 1 is volunteers, no? They volunteer. Pag nakabalibad those with terminal illness, the doctor will say there's a trial ongoing, so you can volunteer. Phase 2 is small trial. I don't know the exact number, but small trial. Phase 3 is a large trial, and that's where they get the preliminary data, which becomes now the basis of an EUA when something like that is urgent. No? So in this situation, they use the preliminary data to come up with the EUA. At some point, you have a large enough number of people vaccinated, and so that final data will now form the basis to issue a CPR. And it's after the CPR, the Certificate of Product Registration, is issued, that's when phase 4 comes in. So phase 4, as His Honor correctly pointed out, is post-marketing surveillance. So pwede ngang ma-recall, like His Honor said. That's when that step could come in na, ay, nagkamali tayo, pwede pa itong ma-recall. Or they continue and maybe they just post what are the adverse effects. Thank you.
Right,
Just a quick point, Mr.
Senator
President.
Gordon, go ahead.
President, thank you very much. I just want to, I was listening to the conversation heartily, and I talked to Eric Domingo and asked him, what is he going to do? I think the issue here is whether we're going to accept already the donation that was overtly given. And even Teddy Boy Locsin, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs this morning, in the newspaper said that, this is a purely diplomatic initiative so far as they're concerned. My question to Secretary Domingo, is he going to accept it? He says, if the DOH recommends it, he still has to go through examination and trial before it is admitted, Mr. President. And even if it is admitted, it will only be for that bulk that has been submitted. If they're going to use it en masse, they will have to go through another examination process, Mr. President. So, ang nakakagulo talaga, yung sinabi nga doon sa Section 4 sa Bayanihan Law, hindi naman nakakagulo na, under dire circumstances or emergencies, the President has authorized it, provided it is already being applied and approved by WHO or by CDC. But in this particular instance, because we're very careful, we don't want anybody just giving us, and then FDA says, yes, they still have to examine the 50,000 or 30,000, whatever is going to be given. And after that, when they apply for more, they say we want to use it en masse, they will still have to go through the process of being examined. That's just a point of information that I wanted to point out, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, briefly, Mr. President, Senator Angara po.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to further maybe hopefully clarify Section 12 of the Bayanihan 2 law, it does not intend to do away with stage 4 trials, as earlier mentioned, Mr. President. The point of that provision, as initiated by Senator Pia, and we jointly worked on the wording, is to allow the government to move towards early procurement, despite not completing the stage 4 trial, as mentioned by Senator Pia earlier. Because if you do it sequentially and you wait before you commence the procurement process, if you wait until stage 4 trials are complete, baka umabot tayo ng next year, Mr. President. So the point was to be able to proceed on dual fronts, Mr. President, but not to do away with stage 4 trials altogether. Just to clarify, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right. Senator Tolentino, if there is no other comment, we'd like to call again the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
With that, Mr. President, I move that we forward the speech of the dear gentleman from Cavite to the Committee of the Whole, Mr. President. We'll be having a hearing this Friday.
All right. Any objection? Chair hears none. So referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a last item on the agenda, but before we do that, I believe we need to do a additional reference of business to be able to tackle that. I so move, Mr.
Right.
President.
The Secretary will proceed with the additional reference of business. The fourth or the third and fourth. The third.
Third additional reference of business, bills on first reading, Senate number 1976, an act mandating a smoke-free environment in all public and workplaces, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9211, otherwise known as the Tobacco Regulation Act of 2003, introduced by Senator De La Rosa.
Referred to Committees on Health and Local Government.
Senate number 1977, an act granting the President of the Philippines the power to suspend the scheduled increases in PhilHealth premium contribution rates, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 11223, otherwise known as the Universal Healthcare Act, introduced by Senator De Lima.
Referred to Committee on Health.
Senate number 1978, an act declaring the province of Catanduanes as the Abaca capital of the Philippines, introduced by Senator Villar.
Referred to Committee on Agriculture.
Senate number 1979, an act providing subsidies and other incentives for indigent public utility drivers in payment of fees and charges for certain certificates and clearances required by the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in applying for a professional driver's license, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committees on Public Services, Social Justice, and Finance.
Senate number 1980, an act mandating the submission of a greening plan as a requirement for the issuance of a building permit, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Environment, Public Works, and Finance.
Senate number 1981, an act mandating public telecommunications entities to disclose service coverage data to the public, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
Referred to Committee on Public Services.
Senate number 1982, an act creating 2 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court and 2 additional branches of the Municipal Trial Court in cities in the 11th Judicial Region, to be stationed in the city of Mati, province of Davao Oriental, and appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose sections 14L and 29 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Organization Act of 1980, as amended, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Justice and Finance.
Senate number 1983, an act converting the Balicuatro College of Arts and Trades in the municipality of Allen, province of Northern Samar, to the Northern Samar Polytechnic Institute and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Higher Education and Finance.
Senate number 1984, an act increasing the number of rays of the sun on the Philippine flag, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 8491, otherwise known as the Flag and Heraldic Code of the Philippines, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
To the Committee on Basic Education.
Senate number 1985, an act mandating the establishment and implementation of the Parent Effectiveness Service Program to strengthen parental involvement in their children's development and learning and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Women, Basic Education and Finance.
Senate number 1986, an act declaring the Luzon Datum located in the municipality of Mogpog, province of Marinduque, a tourist spot and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment and Finance.
Senate number 1987, an act expanding the pool of vaccinations to include allied health professionals and non-medical professionals and students of such professions trained as vaccinators by the Department of Health in order to implement the national program for vaccination in times of epidemics, pandemics, national health emergencies, and other circumstances authorized by the Secretary of Health, amending for this purpose sections 11 and 12 of Republic Act number 2382, also known as the Medical Act of 1959, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Gordon.
To the Committee on Health.
Senate number 1988, an act exempting the local government units and private sector who are acquiring and purchasing COVID-19 vaccines from import duties, taxes, and other fees, including the exemption from Republic Act number 9184, otherwise known as the Government Procurement Reform Act, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
Senate number 1989, an act amending Republic Act number 7941, entitled an act providing for the election of party list representatives through the party list system and appropriating funds therefore, otherwise known as the Party List System Act, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms.
Senate number 1990, an act establishing the Internet Infrastructure Integration Program in road infrastructure projects to save costs and accelerate the development of Internet connectivity through the country, providing funds therefore, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Lapid.
To the Committees on Public Works, Science and Technology, Finance.
Senate number 1991, an act amending sections 129, 130, 131, 132, and 133 of Commonwealth Act number 141 as amended, otherwise known as the Public Land Act, by increasing the penalties imposed against those who violate specific provisions thereof, introduced by Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Justice.
Senate number 1992, an act providing a national emergency policy and framework for government-initiated petroleum exploration and development, further amending for the purpose the Charter of the Philippine National Oil Company, PNOC, as amended, introduced by Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Energy and Finance.
Senate number 1993, an act amending Section 3H of Republic Act number 9262, otherwise known as the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004, thereby providing protection to persons over 18 years of age but who are suffering from a disability, illness, condition, or incapacity, introduced by Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Women.
Resolution, PS Resolution number 615, resolution urging the Philippine government to allow the local government units and private sector to acquire and purchase COVID-19 vaccines for their constituents, employees, and dependents, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee of the Whole on the COVID-19 vaccination program.
Fourth additional reference of business, resolution, PS Resolution number 616, resolution expressing the sense of the Senate to oppose the unilateral termination of the 1989 University of the Philippines UP Department of National Defense D&D Accord, and to urge UP and DND to commence a dialogue and find a common ground that promotes peace and security and protects academic freedom and the pursuit of excellence, introduced by Senators Pangilinan, Ontiveros, Binay, Recto, De Lima, Drilon, and Villanueva.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order Senate Bill number 1955. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objections? Hearing none, so transferred.
Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill number 1955 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 1955, an act providing for the national energy policy and regulatory framework for the Philippine liquefied petroleum gas industry.
Mr. President, may we recognize the sponsor? May we recognize the sponsor, Senator Sherwin T. Gatchalian, to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Sherwin Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone. Mr. President, The legislation we are sponsoring today seeks to regulate and promote an important energy source in our country, liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, as it is commonly known. Specifically, LPG refers to commercial propane gas, butane gas, or a mixture of the two. LPG accounts for 12% of the country's demand for petroleum products in 2019. It is a versatile fuel used for many purposes: heating, lighting, and cooking for households, industries, and commercial establishments, and even fuel for motor vehicles, with overall domestic consumption growth at an average of 6% annually. According to the most updated data of the Philippine Statistics Authority, more than 8 million Filipino households, or approximately 40%, use LPG for cooking. This means 4 in 10 households are dependent on LPG daily. One possible reason is cost. A 353 peso LPG cylinder can last a little over a month when used for cooking, compared to 441 pesos of electricity used for the same purpose. This 88 peso difference makes LPG the cheaper alternative by 25%. So crucial is LPG in a Filipino's life that it is classified as a basic necessity under Republic Act number 7581, or the Price Act, and is subject to price freeze during calamities, emergencies, or similar circumstances. Yet despite the crucial role of LPG in the economy, there is still no comprehensive regulatory framework governing the industry. The existing framework, if one may call it that, is essentially a patchwork of various policy issuances authored by the Department of Energy, Department of Trade and Industry, Bureau of Philippine Standards, other government agencies, and even local government units. Senate Bill number 1955, or the LPG Act, seeks to streamline this patchwork of executive issuances into a clear legal and regulatory framework to govern the Philippine LPG industry. The regulatory reforms embodied by this legislation would ensure more efficacious health, safety, security, environmental, quality, and competition standards for the benefit of consumers as well as LPG participants. For the benefit of our peers, I will discuss the salient points of this lengthy, comprehensive legislation as succinctly as possible, focusing on two important aspects: safety and competition. Safety is crucial because LPG is a highly flammable and even explosive fuel that poses a major fire hazard if not stored or handled properly. According to the Bureau of Fire Protection, there were 1,161 reported fire incidents between 2010 and August 2020 attributed to LPG explosions. Maring naalala niyo pa ang nangyaring pagsabog noong 2013 sa Serendra, sa Global City, Taguig, na kumitil ng ilang buhay at nag-iwan ng iba pang sugatan. Lumabas sa investigasyon na gas leak ang naging sanhi nito. Maring nabalitaan ninyo rin ang pagsabog ng isang water refilling station noong Hunyo taong 2019 sa Gastambide Street sa Sampaloc, Manila, na nag-iwan ng 7 sugatan at sumira ng ilan ari-arian. Tulad ng nangyari sa Serendra, ang dahilan ng pagsabog ay isang leak nagmula sa tangke ng LPG. Ginong Pangulo, hindi sana mangyayari ang mga aksidenteng ito kung merong angkop na panuntunan sa ligtas na paggamit ng LPG. As such, there are 3 main features of the bill to provide safeguards for the sound use of LPG. First, this bill outlines with precision the various responsibilities of government entities engaged in regulation of the LPG industry. The Department of Energy will be the primary enforcer and implementer of this act and will serve as a primary licensing authority for qualified LPG stakeholders. The bill also vests DOE with significant enforcement and visitorial rights to ensure that the various Philippine National Standards, or PNS, and codes promulgated by the DTI BPS for all aspects of the LPG industry are strictly complied with by all LPG stakeholders. The DTI, BPS, DILG, BFP, LTO, Marina, PNP, DNR, and LGUs also have responsibilities outlined in the law. To ensure cohesive standards across all agencies, DOE is given the power to create technical working groups and technical committees involving all these agencies. Second, the bill also lays down in detail the responsibilities of LPG industry participants under the law. Importers, bulk suppliers, bulk distributors, haulers, refillers, trademark owners, marketers, dealers, and retail outlets are specifically enjoined to observe stringent safety protocols and comply with clear-cut and streamlined regulatory processes. Third, the bill establishes the LPG Cylinder Improvement Program, which will ensure that unsafe cylinders will immediately be taken out of circulation and replaced with new cylinders that meet strict quality requirements. Hopefully, this will significantly decrease the number of LPG link explosions and fires in the future. The continued deployment, the continued development of competition in the LPG market, on the other hand, is important for the benefit of consumers. As such, the LPG Act institutionalizes the cylinder exchange and swapping program, where consumers can bring any brand of empty LPG cylinder to any retail outlet and use it to purchase other brand of LPG in cylinder carried by the retail outlet. Sa ngayon po, kung ano ang tatak ng silindro mo, yun lang ang pwede mong bilhin na LPG. Kaya kung gusto mong lumipat sa ibang klase ng LPG dahil mas mura ito, hindi ka basta-bastang makakalipat dahil kailangan mo munang bumili ng bagong silindro. Through the cylinder exchange and swapping program, consumers are no longer limited by the brand of LPG cylinder they are holding and can source LPG from various brands depending on the price. This fosters true price competition within the LPG sector. To ensure compliance of all interested parties with the provisions of this law, we have provided an extensive enumeration of prohibitive acts and the corresponding penalties. Considering that the economic and public safety ramifications of non-compliance with responsibilities under this law, we can be sure that LPG industry participants will be made to comply. In closing, Mr. President, I would like to note that various versions of this legislation have been pending in Congress since 2004, way back during the 13th Congress. Considering that the importance of LPG as household energy source and keeping in mind the hazardous quality if left improperly regulated, it is certainly time for this bill to finally become a law. Therefore, Mr. President, along with the co-author of this bill, Senator Manny Pacquiao, whom I thank for his support, I respectfully seek for the approval of this important energy legislation by this esteemed chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. To allow our colleagues to study the measure further, I move to suspend consideration of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure suspended.
Mr. President, before we adjourn, we just have a few housekeeping measures to tackle.
Go ahead.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 35th session, Monday, January 18, 2021. Consider the same as approved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. The journal is approved.
Also, change of referral, Mr. President. May we make a change in the referral? I move to change the referral of PS Resolution number 599-600-602. Yesterday, the body referred Senator Gordon's privileged speech, which dealt with the same subject matters on these resolutions. These are the unlawful killings of doctors, journalists, lawyers, judges, and others, to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. To move for consistency, Mr. President, PS Resolution number 599-600-602 be also referred to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, and secondarily to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. So referred.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I also got a letter from Senator Tolentino that informing our office that Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa, as a member of the Commission on Appointments, I believe that's you will have to make that order, Mr. President, to replace
It's,
Senator, yeah,
we
to
can
elect.
entertain a motion to that effect.
Yes, I move to elect, Mr. President, Senator Bato de la Rosa. Vice Senator Francis Tol Tolentino, effective January 15, 2021. I so move.
That is in the Commission on Appointments.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator De La Rosa is elected.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, we have no other items on our agenda for today. I therefore move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, January 20, 2021. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 20, 2020.
Thank you very much. A good day, everyone.